hold space for your darkness, a first responder mental health podcast hosted by me, Erin Jane, where we have conversations about what it's like to perform a first responder role and the mental health challenges that can accompany it. Hello and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I'm your host, Erin Jane. And today I am joined by the lovely Bart Wichowski. So Bart is a United States Army veteran, having served for 8 years as a military police officer, including deployment to Iraq. His service includes an incident involving being wounded in action, for which he received the Purple Heart. Bart has also had extensive experience as a law enforcement officer, in total 20 years, including as a officer with the Federal Department of Veteran Affairs and as a member of the New Britain Police Department down in Connecticut, where his roles included being a member of the peer support team, critical incident team, a field training officer, and crisis negotiation team leader. He was also instrumental in developing a mental health unit where he spent the last 2 years of his career. Bart is now retired from his law enforcement career and is a mental health clinician, or better otherwise known as a therapist, where he specializes in treating trauma and PTSD, including with clients with first responder, active duty military, and veteran backgrounds. So thank you for joining me today, Bart. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
That's great. So I was just talking with you offline, and it is kind of crazy. I think it's like that you've lived about 10 different lives. So I'm really excited to delve into them with you today.
Same here. I love to bring up the past. It's always a good time.
So talk to me about why you decided to join the Army.
So, okay, this is a very funny story. I wish there was this patriotic thing that was inside of me, and that, I grew up when somebody in my family was military and I was following the lineage. That's not exactly what happened. So growing up, I kind of always knew I wanted to be a cop. And I was like, LAPD is my dream. I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. So he and all those 90s action flicks were like where I want to go. So everybody that I talked to who was a police officer was like, you need either college or military. This is back in the day when, you had 3,000 people applying for one position. So I'm like, I got to be competitive. So the National Guard was something that I was kind of interested in. But the part that I really kind of kicked off was I tried to impress a girl. I'm like, we went to this college fair together, and I'm like, I'm going to be a soldier. So this is going to work out. Yep.
Don't be so cliched, Bart.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to impress somebody, and it totally went in the wrong direction. So I go to the recruiting office, and the guy there was Special Forces, or had been Special Forces. So he's selling me on the military and everything. And I'm getting jonesed about. I'm like, this is so cool. Okay, maybe, to hell with her. I'm interested in this. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I want to be a cop when I grow up, and I want military police. He's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. We're going to get this done. So this is 1999. This is pre 9/11 and the big boost of recruitment and everything. So I'm like, roger that. Going to go do this. So we go through all the paperwork. I'm 17 at the time, so I had to get my parents' permission and everything. We go to MEPS in Springfield, Mass.
Yep.
And this is where, they make you do the duck walk, and it's the worst experience in the world. And then they go to the color vision test. And I knew I was colorblind, to an extent, but I didn't think I was that bad. And the guy's like, hey, kid, sorry, it ain't going to happen. So dreams crushed completely. I'm like, oh, man, this is never going to happen.
No.
It sucks. Oh, yeah, I was totally out of it. So I go home. The recruiter's like, hey, don't worry about it. Give it some time. We'll figure something else out. Maybe we'll figure out a different job for you. So, okay. So I go back and I talk to my dad. Now, my dad, full of wisdom, he's like, kid, why don't you just do this? Get in for whatever job they'll accept you. And then once you're in, see if you can kind of make some connections. And that's where networking really started to kind of pick up in me. So I said, okay, yeah, what's the job that you guys have? They're like, well, dude, you're colorblind, so you can't do any combat stuff. I'm like, okay, what do you have? And you're like, well, you can be an admin guy. And I'm like, oh, admin? He's like, yeah, but don't worry about it. You'll be in. So I'm like, okay. So I go and join this admin unit in Connecticut. And I'll tell you
Yeah.
right now, it was a blast. Like, I had so much fun every weekend we were there. It was like a bunch of guys who were like my age. And,
Yeah.
I'm 18 at the time, so they're 21. So, of course, fake IDs and all that good stuff. And they're taking me out drinking, showing me what the military's like. So I'm like, hell yeah, this is good to go. So
Yeah.
let's fast forward a little bit. It's after 9/11. So now, like, all these units are gearing up. I want to say this is probably like late 2001, early 2002. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody's like, hey, these units are gearing up. The military police are looking for people. And I'm like, here we go. Here's the opportunity. Networking. Exactly. So I'm like, I've got some friends who are in the medical unit. So again, it's a girl that I knew. So I'm like, hey, listen, can you do me a solid? And she's like, yeah, no problem. And of course, this is like 20 years ago. So like, they're not going to come after me now. But, I go to the test and she's like, help hooking me up. And I'm like, sweet, now I'm an MP. I'm in. Haha, I score.
Yeah.
So I go in and the unit gets activated. And I'm like, okay, this is something new. This is National Guard. Like, when I first signed up, they're like, dude, it's never going to happen. You're never going to go to war. It's Connecticut Army National Guard. Maybe you're right. It's probably going to be
those
weather
naive
stuff.
days of 1999.
Of course. I'm like, nothing's ever going to happen. So now I'm sitting there and they're like, hey, buddy, guess what? Your ass is going to war. And I'm like, okay, but I signed up for this. I wanted this. So I'm like, okay, this is going to happen. So February of 2003, I ended up getting deployed to Baghdad, Iraq, which a lot of people would be like, getting deployed is probably like not so, unless they're like career military and this is something that they've been like training for and they're like, okay, I'm a war fighter. This is what I've been waiting for. I thankfully was like, okay, I was about to get kicked out of school because I was the epitome of a frat boy. I got in with a fraternity early on. My grades went to shit. And pretty much December of that year, they were like, hey, dude, like, you're done with school. You need to get out of here. Like, we're kicking you out. And then February, I get deployed. So I'm like, life is awesome. Sweet. So, yep, here I go off to war. Big smile on my face. I'm like, okay, now I'm not getting kicked out of my house. My parents aren't mad at me anymore. I'm in war now. Okay. But again, this is early 2003. Baghdad had just kicked off. So it really wasn't that crazy of a time. There wasn't like Afghanistan or later on with Iraq, where everything really kind of was insanity and there was just constant work to be done. We went in and we really weren't due too much. Like, some of the unit or some of the platoons got split off into different places, but the job itself was relatively easy. We trained, we worked out with the Iraqi Police Force and kind of worked with them, did patrols, things like that. So nothing too stringent.
Was this part of like what they refer to as the Operation Iraqi Freedom? Like, was that kind of the first thing, like insurgents of American troops in?
Yep. So the way that they had told us is that our unit actually went into Baghdad shortly after the Marines had taken it over. So it was like a couple of months later. There was still brass on the ground everywhere, but for the most part, it was not too nuts.
Yeah. Okay. And so you being a member of the
fun way.
No, that's fine. And so, you being like a member of the military police, I think I was obviously doing a little bit of research, as I tend to do. And I think I saw that you were doing like, is it close personal protection? Was that of like other military, like upper echelon members, or was that of like, I don't know if there was like any kind of Iraqi government at the time, like who were you protecting and training and all that kind of thing?
Sure. So we did a few of the sheiks that were, community members. We would kind of bring them to meetings back and forth. It wasn't as frequent. We never did any of like the cool stuff with any of like the people in the green zone. Like, we were stationed in the green zone for a little bit, but we did especially my platoon. We didn't really do too much of that. We did go on joint patrols with the Iraqi Police Force. So, I mean, at the time, government's there, but it's so shattered. And they're like, okay, officers are going out there. So we're linked up with them. And most of the guys that were in the unit with me were like Connecticut state troopers, cops from Connecticut. So they're like, okay, we're going to try to bring this law enforcement to here. Except the Iraqi Police Force, I mean, they were pretty much hired thugs early on. There was no real police force there. And so we would link up with them. drive around, try to do stuff for the community. And it was just like, yeah, no, this is not going to happen. We need to like yank all these guys out, fully
Mm-hmm.
train them, fully get them into something. And it was not the case. So when they were arresting somebody, it was like, yeah, this is like, we're watching this. I'm like, oh my God, like this is inhumane. But they're like, no, this is like what they do. Like, there's no
This is
such
how
thing
they
as
do
like,
it. Okay.
yeah, there's no like freeze police. It's just, popping off shots at people who are running away. I'm like, Jesus, wild, wild west around here.
Jesus. Okay. So no like use of force provisions or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. There's nothing like that. No progression whatsoever. It's like, oh, you want to say something to me? It's like pop. And I'm like, dude, you can't do that. He's like, no, it's okay. It's okay. And that's just like the norm. It was like, all right, well, we're here. It is what it is.
Yeah. It's some cultural differences, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
So were you then, obviously in the introduction, I mentioned about the fact that you were involved in an incident where you were wounded and subsequently awarded the Purple Heart. Was that sort of incident on like a joint patrol, or what are you sort of comfortable sharing about that time?
Sure. So that was actually later on. So our mission changed frequently. The one thing I forgot to mention early on is that when we got deployed, we didn't really have a mission. It was just like, okay, we're here and now do something. So that's how we jumped from like doing all these different jobs.
Okay.
So later on, we transitioned to now teaching at the academy. And this is funny because this continues on later in my life. There seems to be a theme with teaching academies. So we're training the Iraqi Police Force on how to shoot guns. And I'm not a big firearms guy at this point. Like I learned it through the military, had a few in my life, but I wasn't like an instructor. And we had to teach them, basic qualification. So we were doing this for a couple of weeks. And in December, we always switched up our routes. We never went the same way. We always took different routes and everything like that, except for one piece. We always had to go through this one little market in order to get onto the highway. We couldn't switch it up. There's no other alternative routes. We always had to hit this park. So December 27th, 2003, we're driving. We're in our convoy. And it's a Sunday. And I remember it because it was very foggy outside. There wasn't too much going on. And we go through this market. The market's usually bustling with people. There's nobody there that day. And it's like, all right, something's not right about this.
Yeah.
Suddenly an explosion happens. I'm thinking, because I'm up in the turret. Now you have to, I want to paint you the picture. There's no up armored Humvees at this time. We don't have like any protection whatsoever. IEDs are just starting to kind of come on scene. But it's a soft skin Humvee. Like there's no real protection. We still have flak jackets. Like this is how early on these days were. Like the M16s we had, I used to call them muskets. Like that's how big they were. So I'm in the turret. I'm 6'7", so you can imagine like how much of
I was gonna say you're a big dude, like
yeah. And before I had been the driver, and I was just like, oh no, I'll go in the turret because the guy who was up there had been transferred out. So I was like, yeah, I'll go in the turret, no big deal. Nothing's really going on. It's cool, checking things out. And I thought when the explosion happened that one of the 203 rounds inside the Humvee had gone off. So I'm like, oh my God, like I'm checking my legs. I'm like, geez, shrapnel's all over the place. And it's just smoke everywhere. So the Humvee's rolling to the side. It stops. Convoy stops. And I kind of jump out. I'm looking around, kind of still dazed. Don't really know what's going on. But I knew, I remember, get out of the vehicle. Like, get off the X. Like, you got to move. So I grab my sergeant. She's in the front seat in the passenger side. Get her out. Move her to the side real quick. Everyone's yelling. I grab her and I move back to where the other Humvees are up front. So we were the third vehicle in line out of 4.
Okay.
So we get her over there. The first and second vehicle team kind of comes out. We go over to the Humvee. We can't open the door. The blast had been so strong that it pretty much almost fused the door to the frame. Like we're trying to rip this thing off everything. White Mercedes comes by, a couple of pop shots. Nothing like it was that coordinated where it was like an ambush style setup.
Yeah.
But, there was a couple of shots that were fired. So we're kind of trying to secure the area. I remember hearing one of the guys calling for a medevac, and they're like, nope, scene's still too hot, and we were pretty close still to the green zone. So they're like, no, we're going to send over, mechanized unit. So we're like, okay. So we're kind of setting up. Of course, I say it's okay now. We're all like, what the fuck? Oh my God. Like, we're National Guardsmen. Like, holy shit, we just got blown up. Like, fuck. This is like insanity. So like I say, we keep our cool now, but back then I know we were just like, fuck. So yeah.
So just to, I guess, clarify, your vehicle or one of the ones in front of you either drove over either a trigger or an IED, like somewhere in the road?
We don't know. That's the thing, though. So we don't know if there was like a trigger
okay.
man somewhere, or if it had been placed with some kind of like time detonator or some kind of trigger point. Because here's the thing: usually, like as we saw things progress in Iraq, we started noticing the first vehicle and the last vehicle. Typical ambush style, you want to knock out those vehicles, bottleneck everybody, and start attacking there. What probably happened is that there was either somebody who saw it and there was a time delay. So by the time it went off, it hit my vehicle instead. It didn't hit the first one, and it didn't hit the second one. Or I'm sorry, the last one.
Okay.
So, again, we're sitting there, and then suddenly the M1 Abrams tank shows up and crushes everything coming over the road. We see a bunch of guys show up, and you're like, okay, now we got the scene secured. We got the driver out. He's completely banged up. His legs all jacked up. We're like, okay, we need to get him out of here. We get him into the first Humvee. As we're doing that, another device goes off. I watch the guy from another unit walk up and get blasted by this fucking thing. So now we're like, everybody's got to move. We got to get the fuck out of here. So we get into the Humvees. We hightail it back to the green zone. My driver, he ends up getting medevaced out. He's medically done with the military. He's out. Again, early days of Baghdad, we were back on the road 2 days later. It was like, you got to go back. We don't have the time to kind of recoup or anything like that. You had a mission to do. So back out there. The damage to me really wasn't that significant. Like I blew out my eardrum. I had some shrapnel in my back, like tiny pieces. My vest actually caught a couple of pieces of shrapnel. So I got lucky that way. My helmet had a nice gash in it. And of course, different military, different times. So I wrote on there, "You miss motherfuckers," and they were like, "No, you can't have that. You have to like put something over it." So I looked like a tool bag because I had my regular sized helmet with my little writing on it with another cover on top of it. So like, yeah, you can't do that. Like someone's going to be offended by that. And I'm like, they just blew me up. Can I be offended by that?
You're like, they just took a pot shot and missed. Like this is kind of for my own ego, if nothing else.
Exactly. And I was like, can I poke fun at this? I'm still here, and haha, fuckers, you missed. And like, no, you can't do that. So like, all right, whatever. So I looked like a douchebag for the rest of the deployment, but it is what it is. But that was really like the only big incident that occurred for me. Of course, we're driving through places, you see people staring at you with the death stare and things like that. But that was like the only really big engagement I ever got into. There were other guys in my unit who had it way worse off. There was a couple other IED attacks. There was other Purple Hearts that were awarded. Other units, especially the infantry guys and Marines, I know that they were like out there kicking ass, kicking indoors every single day. My experience with kicking indoors was very limited. It was early on, and then that was it. Like it only happened a few times. Again, a very basic, I want to say, like just average deployment, nothing too much. But yeah, that was my one big thing. Other thing that kind of sticks with me every once in a while, and this kind of, again, this is another theme that goes on later on in life, is kids. One of probably the most traumatic events, and it's wild that I say this is the most traumatic event ever, is again, we're driving through, we're doing joint patrols with Iraqi police, and we see these kids playing in the soccer field, and they're kind of like kicking something around. We don't pay any attention to it. You see kids all the time. Driving through, a few minutes later, boom. We're like, what the fuck? Turn around, we go back there. These kids are all laying all over the place. And they're young kids too. I want to say they're like 7, 8, somewhere around that age. And so we're like, holy shit, we got to like scoop them up. We don't know what happened. We don't know if it was a mortar attack, whatever. We grab the kids, we go. A few of them are like jacked up, not really missing limbs, but like really big injuries. And there's a couple of kids that just have nothing. They're knocked out. So we're like, okay, we'll bring them to the hospital.
Yeah.
You have to imagine, Iraqi police or Iraqi hospitals at the time, absolute dog shit. Like there's nothing that's medically sound over there. But the Iraqi cops are like, no, we have to get them here. This is the fastest place. So we drop the kids off. and that's it. And we continue on our way. So we had been with these guys, the Iraqi cops, a few times since then. And they kind of followed up and told us like, hey, the kids that were screaming survived. The kid that wasn't yelling was dead because he had a piece of shrapnel about yay big that hit his heart, and that was it. Lights out. So it was like, holy shit. Like, and that was like the big one that always stuck with me. And that's the one that I pushed out. I was like, that's it, kids. It's war. It fucking sucks, but you still have a mission to do, and you got to continue on. And that's one, like, again, that's a theme that comes up later on. But yeah, that was kind of my experience in Iraq. It was definitely trippy. It was definitely something that it really kind of made me think about like, hey, perspective. Okay, do I go into this place and say, okay, I hate these people and I'm all about war and, I'm going to do what I have to do? Or am I going to go here and be like, okay, I'm here to do a job. I'm going to be a professional about it, but also let me find some of the beauty, if I can, in this place. And I actually kind of did. The people were amazing. The interpreters that we had, the architecture was gorgeous. The stuff that was still standing, of course. The food, depending on where you went, was actually pretty good. Sanitation, not so much, give or take. But you figure it out. But
you take the good with the bad.
Exactly. So yeah, that was my experience with Iraq.
Wow. And well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And I think you sort of in obviously a little bit of like a roundabout way, but you really I think you kind of hit on a lot of sort of first responder and military personnel's experiences in terms of like, we can all handle most shit. And then it's always the kids. It's always the jobs of the kids that like, or the parental, even if like a kid is maybe an older, like a teenager or an adult, it's the parents' reaction to that, or like us relating to it in that respect that I think, I mean, I'm sure you have and I have, we lose count of the amount of either veterans and first responders we speak to. And it's always the jobs with the kids, because they're, regardless of what side of war you're on, the kids are generally the innocent victims in it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, no, thank you for sharing your experience. So you did that, and was that deployment? Because I think they were roughly, the guard ones are about 12 months-ish.
Yep. So the last part of that story, so you're going to love this. We were on the tarmac, ready to fly back to Connecticut. And all our gear is gone. Like, our commanding officer already flew out. So my platoon and like one other like team was still left behind. And they were about to keep us because, do you remember Blackwater with Fallujah, where they ambushed that convoy and they killed those 3 guys? They kind of dragged them through the streets, hung them up on the bridge. Yeah. We were on the tarmac when that happened, and they were pretty much like, nobody's leaving. Like, now, like, war is really kicking off. She's since passed, but Governor Jody Rell at the time got on the horn, was like, no, my people are coming back. Like, fuck you. They've done their time. They're coming back. So she really kind of stepped up and helped us get back. But it was a one and done operation for me. After that, I was like, okay, I've done my time. I've served my country. My time is almost done in the military, and I'm just going to continue on my LAPD dreams.
Fair enough. And so you were, I think, was it in the guard, was it for 8 years all up?
Yep. So I get back. I still had about 3 years left on my contract. So I did one more year just with an MPs. And then I had 2 more years left. But they were like, hey, listen, dude, they're going to send you back. So if you re-enlist for 2 more to make that 8, we'll give you a year off. So like, you don't have to report to duty. You don't have to do anything. Like, you figure life out, because they're like, you have a Purple Heart and we really kind of like want to make sure that you're happy. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I took a year off, and that was supposed to be my year of kind of like getting my shit together, figuring myself out, and deciding like, well, I knew my military time was done. I was like, there's nothing more that I really want to do. I kind of accomplished everything I wanted to. I became an MP. I served overseas. I was decorated. I'm like, okay, I'm done. I've completed.
I've done all of the things. Yeah.
Exactly. So during that time, I actually took a road trip, and I took about 2 months off from life. Me and a buddy of mine just traveled the United States. This is back when there's no GPS. All we had was our big atlases, and we just drove, and we would hit wherever. So that's kind of like what I did during that time to decompress and kind of like figure life out. Again, I kicked the can down the road for the LAPD thing though, so I was like, let me just kind of fuck around with life a little bit. So when I got back, it was like, okay, one more year, and I transferred to another unit where I just kind of I hung out. It was part of a training unit, but I didn't have to do any of the training. So I just kind of was in the background answering phones. It wasn't anything major, but that was pretty much how I ended my military career.
Okay. And so you were obviously kind of like a heat-seeking missile, like to get further law enforcement experience. Talk to me about, because we spoke about it online, and I didn't know that this was a thing. So a federal law enforcement officer with the Department of Veteran Affairs.
Yes.
Explain.
So I'm going to start off by saying that every VA station is different. And what I mean by that is you have like a director of a hospital, and they pretty much run their ground. So the director of a VA hospital in Connecticut will be different than a director of a VA hospital in, let's say, New York, Montana, like any state. They run it how they see fit, which is a whole other discussion in of itself that would probably be here for weeks on end. But when I joined up, it was so between the military and kind of where I ended up with my police job, I was working as security for a hospital. I'm like, all right, I kind of need an in-between gig until I figure this whole thing out. And during that time there, again, networking, I met a guy who was like, hey, I got friends at the Veterans Affairs Police in West Haven, so I was working in New Haven at the time, so it's right next door. And I was like, oh, I've been to the VA before. Like, and they're like, dude, they have cops there. And I'm like, what do they do? And he's like, no, like they have like real cops. Like, you're a federal police officer. I'm like, no shit, that sounds so cool. Like, wow, federal police officer. Of course, I didn't know anything at the time. So I'm like, this sounds like a great opportunity. So I go there and I meet the guy who's kind of like their detective / recruiter. Like, he was the buddy. Yeah. So I go there and I sit with him, and he's like, Bart, you have military experience. That's so badass. And this is like when we started seeing veterans starting to come back, and everyone's like, oh, hell yeah. Like, we want that experience. So he's like, dude, like, it's awesome here. And I'm like, what? He's like, no, you don't understand. It's like a hidden secret. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's not like it's FBI or DEA. This is like the VA. He's like, no, we have problems. So I'm like, oh, what kind of problems? He's like, well, there's a lot of narcotics usage inside the VA. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of like big time investigations at any school you want to go to. We have access to all the federal government schools. So like all these bells are ringing in my head. I'm like, oh my God. And he's like, dude, I completely understand if this is a stepping stone. And as soon as he said that, my dumb ass should have been like, what do you mean it's a stepping stone? This is like you're selling this like this is the greatest job ever. I should have picked up on like, who the hell would use this as a stepping stone? My dumb ass is thinking like, this is a cop job. This is going to be great. So I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. So I get over.
Hey, he obviously earned his VA dollars. Good salesman.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh man, I should have given him an award. So I get on station, and the guys who were working there quickly told me, they were like, hey dude, did he tell you about all this stuff that you get to do? And I'm sitting there like bright-eyed bushy tail. I'm like, hell yeah. He's like, it's all bullshit. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's all bullshit. He's like, we don't do any of that here. He's like, dude, we're VA cops, but like, we're cops in name only. Like, the director pretty much wanted us to be furniture, like seen and don't do anything. Yeah. So I'm like, oh shit. So now I'm like, oh crap, maybe I made a mistake here. But I'm like, let me feel it out. How bad could it possibly be? But plus, I'm actually now a police officer. So I'm like, all right, let's play this out a little bit. And as we continued on, I kind of realized that the station that I was at, and again, this could be much better now. This is just speaking during the time I was there. I kind of realized quickly that this is a place that you go to if you have no aspirations of wanting to progress in life and want to be a police officer somewhere else, or if you had cop dreams and this is where they kind of went to die. Like, you couldn't get anywhere else, and this is where you go. Oh, there were some interesting characters that I worked with. Oh yeah, no, it gets good. So there were definitely some interesting people that I had experiences with. I did actually make some really good connections, though. Again, this is kind of a theme of my life, networking. One of my friends over there, So he actually went out to Los Angeles and became a cop out there. So every day he's in the academy, I'm still at the VA, and
He
we're talking
stole
every
your
day.
dream.
Well, he kind of did. Because he was like, again, we were both childish, like the 80s and 90s. We both loved like the same shows, the same movies. He's like, LAPD, like the history, like he loved it for the same reasons that I did, like history, like California.
I was thinking, like, what's that movie with Kurt Russell and Sylvester Stallone? And don't they play like competing detectives?
Oh, Tango and Cash?
Something?
Oh,
yes. Oh
I think that's it. Yeah. Yeah. And I was just like,
that's all I've got in my head right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like we were like, but we had so much fun working together. Like he was a good friend of mine. But he ends up, he takes that LAPD thing. And this is back when we had Nextel. So every day, like, and my wife like used to hate this. She's like, "Oh, Nick's calling you right now because chirp chirp, the thing's going off." I'm like, "Oh, he's gonna tell me about the academy." So I go running over there, and it's like a 45-minute conversation. He's telling me the things that he did that day, and I'm getting all like excited. I'm like, "Oh, fuck yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm totally gonna do this now." So as time progressed, I'm still at the VA, like not enjoying it because it's mundane work. It's every like 28 days we had to switch shifts, and I'm like, "Oh, this." Days, evening, nights. It's like Groundhog Day everywhere. Every day I went in. And it was just not an environment that was like any kind of law enforcement work. The only thing that I ever did there, I want to say probably like year 2 or year 3, there was a baby that was actually choking, having an allergic reaction. And I was one of the first guys on scene. And I popped the kid with an EpiPen, and so the baby was able to live. So I was like, okay, that was my one experience. But it was just like something where I was like, okay, we didn't do any police work. I never arrested anybody. I never wrote a warrant. I never did anything. The one time I tried to arrest somebody, they're like, you need to call the local PD. I'm like, yeah, but we're federal cops. This is federal land. They're like, no.
I was going to say it's a federal building. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're like, no, you have to call West Haven. So I'm like, we look like douchebags because West Haven would show up and be like, but you guys are cops. And I'm like, yeah, name only. And that used to be my line. And they'd be like, yeah, we get it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, dude. This sucks. But I will say this, though, for all the negatives that occurred over there were a lot of positives as well. I did, again, meet a lot of people that were really interesting. I did get to go on a lot of good trips. For some of the stuff that I really wanted to do, there was no way we were ever going to have access to it. But we also did find other courses that were really interesting. So I did get to travel. That's kind of like where my training and instructing really started to peak. So by like year 4, I started really getting into training. I started really getting into firearms and tactics and things like that. Because I'm like, okay, if I'm here, like, how can I capitalize on the fact that I'm here?
Yeah, so, how can I utilize this? Yeah.
Exactly. So active threat response, active shooters was like really something that was huge. And I was like, okay, I'm going to learn everything about this. I went to the school. I became an instructor through the VA, of course, but it was like really cool. And I became a firearms instructor, and I was like, okay, now I'm really into this. So like weapons and tactics kind of became my life at that time. I kind of used some of the stuff that I learned in the military, kind of morphed it into what we did over there. Again, I kind of had to bring it down to the skill level of what we had. Nobody was military, they were just VA cops. And I think there was like one guy who had been a cop somewhere else. But it was still a decent time. And I got promoted too. I was a sergeant. So I was like, okay, this is good. This is okay. And I went to another site. So I was still in Connecticut, but I wasn't in West Haven anymore. I was actually in Newington. A little bit better, but it was still like middle management. I'm like, not really my scene. I kind of like being, boots on the ground, but it's a promotion, so I'm not going to say no to it, but it ended up working out. And during my time there was this guy who had transferred from another police department. So it was actually New Britain Police. He was a sergeant over there. And his name was Tommy Marino. He was a lieutenant with us. And I love the dude. The guy was absolutely amazing. He got on station, and day one, he's like, "You're not a cop here." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, thank you." Somebody who like recognizes that because he had been a real cop. And he had done like awesome stuff. Like he was the cop from like the 90s. And New Britain back in the day was like active gang violence. Like there were gang wars. It was insane. Like I remember hearing about New Britain back in the day, and it was like, oh yeah, it was a shit show a long time ago. And it's still got its issues now, but during the 90s, it was like badass stuff. So I'm like, okay, Tommy's kind of a cool dude, and he's kind of telling me about these stories, and like I'm getting like, and it was funny because when I became a sergeant, I was like, okay, maybe this is it for me. Cause I'm like, I'm getting older in life now. And this is the part that I kind of jump around a little bit with the LAPD thing. So my buddy goes out to LAPD, ends up hating it. He's like, dude, it's not the LAPD that you and I thought it was. And he was in Van Nuys. And he was like, I wanted to be Rampart. He wanted to be Rampart. Like, we wanted to be like the place. And he's telling me all about it. He's like, dude, it's a dead department. He's like, yeah, they still have their history and whatnot. But he's like, all the policies and everything like that. He's like, you could just see the morales in the shitter. I'm like, okay, maybe not for me anymore. And my wife had been incredibly supportive, and she was anti-California. She's like, I'm not moving out to California. I don't want anything to do with California. But she was like, if this is something you really need to do, we'll figure out a way. Like, we will totally do it. So I was kind of like still jonesing. But as soon as he told me that, I'm like, okay, I trust this dude. He's living it out there. He says it sucks. He's like, the pay is terrible. Like, you can't find any place to live. Traffic sucks. The people suck. He's like, the department is just in the shitter. He's like, don't even bother doing it. And he ended up transferring back to Connecticut. He became a cop over here.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, LAPD's done. Finished.
Yeah.
So going back to the VA, so now I'm sitting there as a sergeant. I'm kind of like, well, I'm older now, I'm getting into my like late 20s, early 30s. Like, maybe the cop training.
So old.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Well, at the time, I thought I was like wicked old. I'm like, I have the body of like 80-year-old. I'm broken from the war. Like, and I have a young daughter, and I'm like, she's breaking me because daughters and whatnot. So I'm like, okay. I'm like, maybe this is maybe not for me anymore. And I still tried a couple of departments. I hadn't gotten in for because it's self-fulfilling prophecy. I was like, well, I'm only going to work out enough just to make it through the test. And that'll be it. And most of the time I didn't, because I was incredibly lazy. I didn't do the things I was supposed to do. Again, a theme in later in life. And I kind of just didn't recognize that I was like shooting myself in the foot. So my wife's like, hey, you're talking to Tommy. Tommy's kind of like really reinvigorating you. Yeah, you're a sergeant. Yeah. Sure, you could stay. We could go to another state and you could promote, like, if you wanted to. And that's the one thing I will say about the VA. If you're like very much like promotion hungry, you could do it in a couple of years. You could go from just a basic officer to a chief relatively quickly, just by jumping from another state to another state to another state. And I was like, well, maybe that's an option for us. And then I'm also looking at other states for PD. So Dallas, Texas. I was looking at North Carolina, a couple other places. And my wife's Canadian, so we even like toyed around with the idea of like going to Toronto or something like that. And at the end of it, it was just like, you know what? Maybe New Britain might be something that I can like really look into. Tommy's telling me these awesome things about it. He really supports it, and he's still really connected to the department. We still do a lot of things like joint stuff with the PD, like using their range, doing some training. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is like the time to do it. So at 7.5 years, working my own schedule, kind of doing whatever I wanted, I decided to make the jump. So now I go to the Bryn Police Academy at 32 years old. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be fine. I've been working out for 6 months. I'm good to go. And I'm getting smoked by these kids. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm a vet. Like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, I totally let like the VA like destroy me. Like, I just became so lazy. I didn't want to do anything. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious. But it was my own doing. It's nothing with the VA or anything like that. So I go through the academy, and that spark gets back in me. I'm like, I'm loving this. Like, ooh, now I'm Thin Blue Line all over again. I'm like, ooh, this is the best thing ever. I'm so excited. I'm going to be in this police department that's got like all this different stuff. And the key is they got black and white cruisers. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm not getting full LAPD, but I'm kind of getting it a little bit. At least I'm getting like the black and white. And we had Crown Vics, and I love the Crown Vic. So I'm over there, and I am loving the academy, make it through, and then I go into FTO. And I was one of the lucky few, and I say that lucky few, who had like 12 different FTOs. And it wasn't because I was a shitbag. It was just that everybody was taking vacations. Everybody was like, had other special assignments. So I'm like, I would get kicked off to like other people all the time. So I'm like, I'm not really learning one way of doing it. I'm learning, 12 different ways of doing it, which was okay because some guys I had more than others. Yeah. And there was one part that I thought I was going to get slammed in. It was like phase 3. So we have 4 phases. Phase 3. And I'm not a traffic guy. I knew nothing about traffic because I came from the VA and we don't do traffic accidents. Like, it's a fucking parking lot. You ain't going to do shit over there. And I went to a traffic collision and I fucked the whole thing up. I fucked it up so bad that the lieutenant, or I'm sorry, he was a sergeant at the time. He was like, this guy's a fucking moron. Like, we hired this guy. He's a former cop. He should know how to do this. And my FTO was like, hey, jackass, he came from a fucking security position. He doesn't know shit about being a fucking real cop. And I even said to myself, I'm like, I'm a cop in name only. Like, you guys keep saying that I'm a transfer. I'm not a fucking transfer. I had to do the academy and everything all over. I went in as a basic dude. So I fucked this whole thing up. And I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. Like, I totally screwed myself. I should just stay with the VA. I was a sergeant. I was going to get promoted again. So then I eventually make it through. I have a really good FTO. He sits me down. We walk through the whole thing. He's like, dude, it's fine. You just do this. And I was like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. So then we go through it. And that was like my only thing. Make it through FTO. Good to go.
Traffic sucks anyway.
I hated it. Every time they came out, I was like, oh, give me the domestic,
never my cup of tea.
Give me the shooting. Oh, yeah, no way. Because everyone's like looking at you and I'm like, I don't fucking, you drive like an idiot, you drive like an idiot. Like, what do you want from me? Like, here's your tickets. You know, everyone gets something. It was just, I hated traffic collisions. I still, to this day, I see one drive by, everyone's like slowing down. I'm like, I'm trying to get through this as fast as possible. I don't want to see any of that shit. I know that poor bastard sitting over there like, fuck, I gotta write this down. These drawings and all that shit. I'm like, I hate this crap. I avoided it. Like,
well, they used to call them jury fuckers in our police force back home.
Oh, no wonder.
And it was like, either jury fuckers or what was the other thing they would say? Because we would have like, I guess kind of similar to Stadies. They were just like traffic management units. Like, so that's all, all they did was drive around and pull people over and attend car accidents, all that kind of thing. And like the derogatory thing that would get said to them is like, only dogs chase cars.
That makes sense. You know what? Next time I come across a state trooper, I'm going to make sure I drop that. I'm going to say it.
There you go. You're welcome. Don't say absolutely. you got nothing out of this interaction, Bart.
Very true. I'm putting that one in my back pocket. I'm definitely going to use that one day. Like, hey, boy,
you're welcome, my friend.
Awesome.
But I interrupted. Please continue.
No worries. So yeah, it was just I make it through FTO, everything's going good. And I got real lucky because from where I scored going through the academy, I didn't have to go to midnights. And thank God, because I did midnights for 2 weeks on FTO and I absolutely hated it. I survived on large black coffee with 2 sugars and 2 of those big monster, Red Bull energy drinks. I was like, how I survived? I have no idea. Like heart palpitation, like God, thank God I didn't have a heart attack. But like it was the worst. It sucked, and I was like, I hate midnights. And I'm like, but you know, I bought into it. So if this is what's going to happen, it's going to happen. And I got lucky. So I went to 4th shift, which was 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Okay. And because New Britain was really good, we had 5 different shifts. They don't do that so much anymore, unfortunately. But we had day shift, evening shift, and midnight. So 1, 2, and 3. And then 4th shift was from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then, 10 to 6. And then from 6 to 2 was that 4th shift. And I loved 4th shift. I had an amazing crew. I had amazing bosses. Like, I felt like I clicked. And I enjoyed it.
We used to call them twilights. They were twilight shifts for us.
Yes, they were the best. Like, you had the best of both worlds. You got some of the day shift stuff that was... that was kind of like, okay, this is a little interesting. But then you got the evening stuff and some of the midnight stuff that was like kind of hairy. It's like, I definitely love this stuff. So I stuck on 4th shift for a couple of years. And then I was like, okay, well, I put in for this street crimes unit because I became an FTO. So in between patrol and becoming or trying out for this thing, I became an FTO. Had tried out for the rifle team, but they were very much like, hey, we're giving it to the new people because we want them to kind of feel like they have a connection. So, but we want you to be an FTO. I'm like, all right, screw it. I'll just be an FTO. So became an FTO, really like felt like this was something I just loved. I love being with somebody new, training them, kind of like going through every piece of the call and just breaking it down. And we were there late every single day. Like, if anybody from New Britain hears this, I apologize, but you know it's the truth. We would actually take calls, and a lot of my FPPOs would make a lot of money because we'd be staying late to take calls. I'm like, more training. And every time we would take that call, I would hear it. I'd be like, ching, all right, here we go. We're going on another call. But I was like, this is great training because
Yeah.
It's always at that last 5 minutes when these really good calls would come out where you really get some really good training. So I'm like, screw, we're going for that. And all my trainees, day one, I'm like, hey, listen, we are going to hustle. We are going to take as many calls as possible because the only way you're going to learn is to throw you in the deep end, and we're just going to go. Obviously, I'm not going to throw you in the deep end to like figure it out. It's like, okay, we're going to work through this together. But, week 2, you're taking reports and you're going to be kind of like quasi-primary. Now, I didn't stack the way it's supposed to be. So first phase, they kind of just observe. They don't do anything. Second phase is 25%. Third phase is 40%. And then by, fourth and fifth phase, they're completely running the show. And I was just like, no, that's not going to work. They need to get this fast. My biggest concern was, and I took this a little bit from the military, what happens if we go somewhere and something happens to me? They need to be able to pick that up and run with it and be able to know how to handle that next thing. Like, let's say I get distracted. So I have to go and do something else. They need to be able to handle what they're going to do. Yeah. So I was very much about that. And they're like, okay, cool. And I had a lot of great FTs. And that's kind of where I look at my career is like, how did these guys turn out? And I'd have to say all except one did amazing things. Some of them continued on in their career, got promoted. Some of them continued on their career, went to other federal agencies and are doing amazing things now. So I felt like, okay, these guys had really good careers and I had like a teeny tiny portion of it, but that was the part I really loved.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
But then you always have that one who kind of screws everything up and it's like, but that's all right.
He's like, gone, you fucked with my average, buddy.
Exactly. I was like, dude, like everybody was graduating. Why? And it was like this thing that he was like, and I have to give him credit. He recognized early on. He's like, this job is not for me. I don't want to do this. And I was like, okay, well, all right, see you later then. But yeah, everyone else did really great. And I was super supportive and super happy when their careers progressed and they just did amazing things.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Oh, no. So I was just going to say, like, obviously I saw as well that you sort of became like active in the peer support and crisis negotiation. Like you sort of really seemed to like diversify yourself a fair bit during your career.
Yep. So I didn't really know which track I wanted to do. So getting into the police department, I was like, okay, I have military training. What's that going to really mostly relate to? SWAT teams. So I'm like, okay, I want to go into the SWAT team. But I was like, you know what? Maybe it's not really for me. Like that bug for that stuff wasn't there. The firearm stuff really wasn't there anymore. So I was like, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. And I was like, well, if I had gone LAPD, what was the thing I wanted to do? I wanted to be a narcotics detective. I'm like, that's so cool. That's like the awesome job. So I was like, all right, I don't really have the knowledge behind that. I really don't know like who's that person's going to teach me. But I ended up meeting a guy who had been on a task force, and me and him linked up a few times. So we were, 2-man car, and we would drive around, and he would kind of like show me some of this stuff. And I was like, okay, this is going to take because he's like on the inside. He knows this world, task forces, everything like that. And the bug did not bite. I was not interested whatsoever. I'm like, we tried it a few times. I just got nothing from it. And I was like, okay, this is not the route I want to go anymore. So SWAT, detective, and narcotics, they're not in the wheelhouse anymore. It's just not for me. Maybe if I had been younger and started it, possibly. But at this point, I'm like, I'm so much older. I got different experiences. I don't really know which route I want to go. So I'm kind of floating a little bit. I'm still in patrol. I'm still happy. But I'm kind of like, I really don't know. Maybe something. And I'm kind of like hoping something's going to kind of fall into my lap. So I worked with this one guy. His name's Phil Violet. And Phil, if you ever hear this, man, thank you very much because you're the reason why I joined CNT. Phil was probably the epitome of what you would want if you were ever in crisis. Like he's the guy who had that 3 a.m. DJ voice. He was so calming. And he's the one who was like, dude, you should probably like try out for this. Me and him went on a call where this guy tried to take both of us off this 3rd-story balcony into this like hill. And we were able to talk him down and kind of stop him. He's like, dude, you kind of kept your cool and you really talked to him and you like connected with him. Like maybe this might be something you want to do. And I'm like, okay, negotiator. I haven't really thought about that. Let me like kick the can a little bit. So I thought about it and I'm like, screw it. Let me give it a shot. Went in, applied, got in, and was like, okay, I think I found my niche now. Like I'm really into this. And I kind of started taking some of that stuff that I was learning on the team, applying it to being out on patrol and loved it. But it was also the time where there was a lot of turmoil. Like COVID was still starting to kick up. There was a lot of, stuff that was going on as far as how the police were viewed by the public. And I was like, I don't know if really Connecticut's really the place I really want to stay anymore. I kind of want to go somewhere else. The department was kind of just like, it was fine. There was no issues as far as like anything going on. But I was like, I don't know if this is really where I want to stay. And I'm a big Kentucky guy. I love Kentucky. I've been on the Bourbon Trail. We have a horse. So like that whole life, I love the state. I went there, fell in love with it, and was like, well, maybe Kentucky's where we want to go. Yeah. And so somebody higher up caught wind, and we all know how things work in police departments. As much as we want to say everything's fair and whatnot, sometimes you get that talking to, and I got that talking to. Really great captain. I will say this though, he was a straight shooter. If I had been a shitbag, he would have never come up and talked to me. Yeah. And he was like, hey, I heard that you were thinking about leaving. And I'm like, yeah, there's I'm just tossing some ideas around. Like, I don't know what I really want to do with my life, but, maybe if this opportunity works itself out in Louisville, Kentucky, then I think I'm going to go in that direction. He's like, let me ask you this. You did training at the VA. Would you ever want to do training here? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, do you see that desk? That really nice desk over there in this big, beautiful office that overviews the city? And I'm like, yeah.
With like, really nice family-friendly hours.
Exactly. He's like, it's a Monday through Friday gig. And I'm like, okay. He's like, and you work 7 to 3. And I'm like, okay. He's like, and, you get to do all this kind of training. Now I get access to all the training. So I'm like, I don't know. So he's like, think about it. So I'm like, okay. And sure as shit, like that afternoon, the announcement goes out to the entire department. Hey, we have this opening in training. So I'm like, all right, fuck it. I'll put in for it. I've got some experience. We'll see what happens. And I have to say, I went up against some really great guys. Some guys who I will honestly say probably deserved it way more than I did. Guys who had many years on the job, way more qualified, just really good dudes. And there was just something that this captain was like, hey, listen, he's going to be our guy. So Bart's the guy. So I get picked and I go up there and I'm living the life. Like, I love everything about this. I love the fact that it's a great team. The captain, the lieutenant, the sergeant, my partners, like we just clicked. And I loved everything about it. So much to the point that I had avoided all like the family get-togethers with the PD and all like the outings. And I was like fully committed. I was, as they say, I drank the Kool-Aid. I was all about the PD. I should have tattooed Mr. New Britain over my chest. Like I was that into it. I loved it. But I also got a lot of it from them. They were sending me to whatever training I wanted. I had access to any day off I wanted. I had weekends off. I had, holidays. Like if we wanted to come in, we could. If we didn't want to, we could figure something out. Like, but there was also a lot of expectation because we also ran our own academy at the police department. So they were like, hey, dude, you get to go be that guy. Oh, yeah. And they're like, you're tall. You were in the military. Go wear your uniform and yell at these guys for 2 weeks. So I did. And I will say this. I was never like a DI or anything like that. I wasn't a drill instructor or drill sergeant or anything like that. But I loved it for the first few academies that we did it. Because the second academy that we did, I ran it. So I ran the whole academy, soup to nuts. And I remember it was like the first week we were like in these kids, like, and I call them kids all the time. Even when I still train at the academy, I still call them kids. I don't know why, it's my thing. But I go over there and I'm like yelling and I'm screaming and I'm losing my shit. And I'm just like really in their faces and they're like doing all the things that I'm doing. And I feel myself like I'm about to fucking pass out because I'm yelling so much. I'm like, whoa, hold on, Bart. You need to take a walk real quick. So I take my hat off. I'm like, wow, I didn't even know this was possible, like to get so into this. But we had a great time. Like I had a great cadre. We had so much fun. And we did it in a point where we didn't really want to get these guys to like quit. We wanted them to, we wanted to show them that they could make it through anything. So we pushed them to their limits. There was a lot of stuff that I took from like Fort Benning basic training from, the 90s and kind of instituted here. And I kind of got called out on it a few times. They're like, hey, dude, you can't do that anymore. And I'm like, why? They're like, because someone's going to get really hurt. And I'm like, but I didn't get hurt. They're like, yeah, but somebody else can. So don't do it anymore. Yeah. Like, okay. But we had a great time. Like, and it was, as soon as those 2 weeks were done, I switched it off. And I went into, okay, you're here to learn and I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure you graduate successfully. Yeah. So the first academy that I was a part of, I think we lost like 1 or 2 recruits. And it was for a couple different things.
Always
One was
happens.
firearms.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's part of the game.
Yeah.
And then when I got to do it, I was like, zero tolerance. I'm not losing anybody. And we started with 32 and I graduated 32. And I was like,
Wow.
I love the class.
Impressive.
I still am in contact with all of them. When they graduated, they bought me a bottle of bourbon and like these glasses that had my badge and name etched into it. So like it was a great class.
Nice. Yeah.
But that's also when I started realizing that I'm going to transition out of like the yelling and the firearms. Like I still did it. I was still a firearms instructor. Like the school sent me to SIG, so I was a SIG firearms instructor, and I did all this different stuff. But I was like, I don't feel the connection there anymore. I want to be able to teach them something that I'm really passionate about. And now I'm progressing in the CNT unit. So we had gone to a call out, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But I had done some stuff with them, and I was like, I really see more value in this than I do with the firearm stuff and the tactics. Like it's all important. But you need the right person to teach that. You need somebody who's passionate. You need somebody who's like, okay, I really buy into this for everything. And I train outside of here and I do all that stuff. And I'm like, that's not me anymore. And I don't want to do a disservice. Like that would be the worst thing ever. So I'm like, okay, let me focus in on the things that I love, which was the mental health stuff, the how to communicate with somebody and stress management. So that's kind of where I shifted my focus. The PD was a little like, hey, dude, we still need you to teach that stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'll teach it, but I can't be a primary. Like, you have to have somebody else. So they made somebody else a primary, and they did me right. They were like, okay, just be in the background, kind of help out, and we'll go from there. So I'm in training. Things are going well. We have a shakeup, though. The first 7 months when I was there were great. They were bliss. I loved it. Everything about it was amazing. And then we had the captain leave. He retired. He had a medical retirement. He ended up leaving. Then the lieutenant who was there, who I absolutely adored, and was like, hey, dude, you need to go for sergeant. Like, you need to promote. Like, she was very, very somebody who was just like, if I ever had any issues, to this day, I would still call her up and be like, hey, listen, Julia, I got some stuff going on. She was just salt of the earth, loved everybody, huge heart. But she ended up retiring. She was like, all right, my time is done. I'm going. And then the sergeant who I had was a really stand-up dude. He got promoted. He went back to patrol. My partner, who was probably one of my best friends ever, and Andy, if you ever hear this, yes, you were my boy back in the day, and now you don't ever want to call me anymore, so whatever. Just kidding. But our tight-knit group just separated, and we got new people in there. And it's not to say that they were any less quality. It was just like that feeling, that connection just wasn't there anymore. So ended up being something where I didn't enjoy going to work anymore. There was a lot of, before we'd be in the know for everything. So the transparency, they would tell us everything all the time. If we needed to know something, we would know days, weeks in advance. Now I was hearing stuff last second, or it's happening right now and you need to go deal with this. But it's like, well, hold on a sec. This is something that we knew about
history,
weeks ago. Yeah. So why is it now that you guys are just telling us last second? What's going on here? So there was more of that. I didn't mesh with the lieutenant. We just didn't get along. At first we kind of did. And I was actually the one who was like, hey, we have to have an open mind. We have new crew coming in. It's going to be okay. Like, we'll figure all this out. And then I ended up being the one who they were like, hey, dude, we don't want you up here anymore. You need to go back to patrol. So during this time, and so I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit, and it kind of goes back to the CNT stuff, where while I'm up in training, I am going back to school because I'm like, okay, I need to kind of figure out what I'm going to do in life, because one day this police job is going to end. It's just the nature of things. So what am I going to do when I'm finished? Am I going to go and teach somewhere, firearms and tactics, or am I going to use my skills and really kind of put it out there? So I'm like, okay, I need an education. I need to finish my degree.
Yeah.
So go back. I finished my undergrad, but I do it in psychology. So I'm like, I really love this CNT stuff, and I really want to be a better negotiator, and I really want to be able to connect with people a lot more. So let me kind of get back into the psychology stuff. So I go full bore into it.
Yeah.
Working on my degree, and kind of going back to that call while we were there, and I knew I was finishing my degree. I'm looking around and I see the cops are like, they're on edge and then they're down and then they have to go to this other call. So I'm like, these guys are all over the place. Like they need some kind of, somebody to kind of release and talk to, but we don't talk to anybody because nobody understands us. So I'm like, okay, maybe psychologist is like the route I need to take. I have the experience because I've been through the FBI crisis negotiation course. I've had a few call outs. I'm really into this. I kind of noticed that mental health is a big thing. So I'm going to go that route. Of course, then I saw the price tag and it's like $250,000 and 10 years of school. And I'm like, okay, no, not going to happen. What's the fastest way I can get to be a therapist? And that's where I kind of settled on being an LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor. Mm-hmm. So finished my degree. I finished my undergrad and go into getting into my master's. So all this is happening while I'm up in training. And I'm and this is the part where I really shot myself in the foot. I should have kept my mouth shut and not been like, I don't need this gig because I'm going to do this afterwards. Because it kind of spread around. It was sour grapes because I was pissed of what was going on. And I was like, well, fuck you. If you're going to do this to me, I'm going to say this. I don't care. Send me back to patrol. And they did. They called me out on it. They sent me back to my patrol. So it was a little unexpected, though, because it was kind of at the time where I had just moved. A little nervous about the big move from where we had been earlier to where we were now. Dragged my wife and kids to a whole other part of the state that we are out in the middle of nowhere now. And it was just like, okay, big transitions. This isn't going well. And also, I had not been the best person ever. And why I say that is because, you get into the job and you think you're going to change the world and it ends up changing you. So I had every checkbox under the sun. I struggled with alcoholism at a couple of points. I struggled with not coming home and treating my family with respect and treating them as a family. I got called out so many times because my wife's like, why are you interrogating our daughter like she's somebody on the street? Why are you treating me like shit? And I was just short and I couldn't recognize it because all this shit was now starting to come to a head. All the calls that I had been to, all the homicides I had experienced. When I was in New Britain, there was not a point in time where we had light summers, where there wasn't something going on. 6 months into being on the job, I get a call for this woman who's laying in the middle of the road, multiple stab wounds, and she's given her last breaths while I'm standing there, or actually I'm on the ground with her, and I can't see anything because it's in the middle of the night. I can't see these stab wounds, and she's gasping for air, and I'm trying to get some kind of information from her, and she ends up dying right in front of me. And it was the first time it had been that close and that intimate, and it brought me back to what happened with those kids. So now I have that going on. And these calls just start compiling. You go to those really bad domestics. You go to those kids who have been abused. And you start investigating. Then you start talking to these perpetrators, and you have to be professional. And inside, you're like, I just want to wring this person's neck. But you can't. You have to be able to talk to them, have to be able to build that rapport so they give you that
rapport.
information.
Yeah,
so that,
exactly.
We can go exactly. This way we can do the criminal justice route. And then, and I don't jump around a little bit, but this is kind of like a big thing when it comes to the kids and the experiences, was there was a fire that occurred. And when I tell this story, this is one that, and this will kind of relate to being in school. It's like 10 minutes before the end of shift. And me and my buddy are sitting there, Crown Vic to Crown Vic, shooting the shit. And we're about to pack it in and call it a night. And suddenly, over the radio, active fire. We need a couple of units to go do traffic control. Okay. But fourth shift is going, because I'm still working second shift at the time. So fourth shift goes. Sorry. And all of a sudden they go, this guy gets on the radio, another cop, and he's yelling, there's a kid inside, there's a kid inside. And all you hear is those V8 engines rip shitting all the way over there.
Yeah.
They're flying from everywhere. Lights and sirens, everyone's going. As soon as you hear kid, you hear fire, everyone's going.
Of course, yeah.
We all tried to get in that house. There was no way it was going to happen. The house is fully engulfed in flames. It's just, there's nothing that we could do. And I ended up sitting with the family in the ambulance all night. I'm trying to tell this father not to go back into this house. That's still, fires are still going. Fire department's still doing the best that they can. I got a hand to New Britain FD. They were doing their damnedest to try to get this kid. and I'm sitting with the father trying to hold him back. I have the mother and the 2 other kids inside, and all they do is they keep telling me, we can hear him screaming, you have to let us go, you have to let us go. And I know what's going on. I know this, if he hasn't come out yet, he's not coming out at all. So I'm sitting there and I'm trying to control myself because I'm like, I have a kid too. I understand where that emotion of wanting to go and protect, and you can't. So sitting there trying to do all this, and it's just now you start seeing where we're compiling a lot of trauma, and it's just building and building. You have these calls, and they just get to the point where I'm like, okay. And now I go back into training where I get let go, and it's a Friday because they always fire you on Friday. And I'm driving home, and this is right before Halloween, because my wife and daughter are sitting in the backyard carving pumpkins. And I pull over, and I'm like, maybe they're all right. Maybe I am a piece of shit. Maybe I am the reason that, like, my wife and kid are unhappy. Maybe I brought this upon myself that, like, I am an asshole at work, and maybe, people would just be better off without me. So at the time, when I was working in training, we had to wear our Class B uniform, so it had all the metal parts on it, tin badge, all the awards, everything like that, and our service firearm, but we had a paddle holster. And I had a paddle holster with my extra magazine, and I was like, fuck it. What's the point? What is the point of going on anymore? My career is dead. Like, once you get kicked out of a unit, that's it. You're done. I'm like, I'm not going to join another police department with this following me somewhere. What I hadn't known is that the lieutenant tried to do an IA against me. But the union thankfully kind of stepped in and were like, hey, just talk to him, figure out what's going on. And I hadn't broken any policies or anything like that. We just didn't connect, and they were like looking for any way to get rid of me. So this is what they used. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about it, and I'm just like, this is it. I'm going to end it right here, right now. Not too far from my house. Somebody's going to drive by and see me. And the big thing that really hit me in that moment is like, oh my God, I teach this. Like, I teach all these warning signs to recruits. I teach this in service. I'm the guy who does all this. And now I'm going to kill myself. And I was just like, okay, no. I have too many things that I still have to live for. I still have to live for myself. I have to live for my family. I have to live for my daughter and my wife. And this is just one thing that's going on. Like, this too will pass. Like, I got blown up, but I was back on the road. I went to all these calls, but I was able to investigate them. I had these bad experiences, but I also was able to find the silver lining in all of them. So this was that moment where I was just like, okay. And the scary part is that when you're in that moment, you feel nothing. There's no anger. There's no depression. You feel empty.
Well, and trying to find that clarity as well of what you're telling me now. Like, I've got all these other things to live for, and this is just one part of it. It's a big part. But then finding that clarity in that moment, I can imagine it's just so incredibly challenging.
So I say, all right, you know what? No, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to live. I'm going to figure this out, and it's going to be okay. And I'm like, there's so much more in life. I'm not going to let this crush me. So truck and drive, get home. Again, my wife and daughter sit there carving pumpkins. No idea that, what almost happened. And I talked to my wife later about it. I'm like, hey, listen, I was really struggling, things like that. And she's like, okay, we talk about it. And she has always been my biggest supporter. And this is going to come a little bit more into what happened in my personal life moving forward, where strength and resiliency really are something that we in my family have always pushed towards. We have seen a lot of bad things happen, and we've always been able to come closer and work through it as a family and get to that other side. So I tell her, we talk about it. I end up seeing a therapist, but I see a therapist once I'm in the master's program.
Okay.
And the reason why, it's not because I couldn't find a therapist or anything like that. The school just offered it for free. And I'm like, oh, screw it. It's free. Why not? It's connected. Let me just go talk to this person. And it was actually a really good connection. I talked to her for a little bit, and we kind of worked through some stuff. So I'm back at patrol. And I've also started my master's program, and I'm kind of in a better headspace now. So I've always been a big proponent of, you got to shoot your shot sometimes. You got to really just throw caution to the wind and take a risk. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't know what anybody else knows as far as why I got kicked out of the training unit or anything like that. But I see the chief there and I'm like, fuck it. Let me try this. So I walk up to him and I go, sir, hey, and I always led with a joke. So I'm like, maybe this will work. I go, hey, so I'm in the master's program at Sacred Heart. Any chance that the city be willing to pay for it? And he's like, ha ha. And I knew I had one of two laughs I was going to get. I was either going to get this belly laugh where I knew I was like, oh, I'm in. The hook is in there. Or I was going to get the blow off laugh. And he gave me the belly laugh. So I'm like, oh, good. I got him. So he's like, oh, why do you ask? And I go, well, I'm in the master's program. And I start going deep into like how I'm going to be a therapist and how I'm going to concentrate on cops, but how I can learn these techniques and bring them to the PD and kind of put it out for the community. And so it piques his interest. And I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, now I got him. So I'm like, okay. I had just seen this documentary on HBO. I don't know if you've ever seen Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. And I'm like,
yeah,
I can do that here. And it's about these two cops in San Antonio, and all they are is just mental health response. Plain clothes, unmarked car, guns are hidden and everything like that. I'm like, I'm bringing this unit here. So he's like, write it up. So I'm like, I'm in. So I write this whole thing up, do this whole proposal. I go through like all the calls that the PD has gone through, and I say, listen, this unit is going to be specifically designed so that your basic patrol officer does not have to respond to these calls anymore. The unit's going to handle it. It's going to be the mental health unit. We're going to handle crisis calls. We're going to handle suicide attempts. We're going to handle anything mental health related. That's our realm, so that they can go and handle these other calls. Because, having been with the PD for, at that point, 9 years, I was just like, it's turn and burn. You go to these calls, they say the magic words, I want to kill myself, I want to kill somebody else, boom, hospital. That's it.
Well, it's that, but then that unit is then tied up off the road for like hours, because when you take them to go get an assessment, they're in your custody until a clinician is like, oh, yep, okay, I've done an assessment. Now I'm going to take it over. Like we used to call it like a Section 10 back home. And I guess it's like I don't know if you guys had the Baker Act. That's what it is in Massachusetts, and same kind of thing. No. So then, you've got like a response unit who should be going to maybe like an armed robbery or an assault or something, is tied up with like someone undergoing mental health crisis, which isn't like any less important, but like you're saying, like someone who's specialized is going to be able to talk to this person and understand what's going on in a better capacity. Like brilliant.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And I was just like, all right, so there's got to be, something better than what we're doing. And a lot of cops, how it usually goes is it's 20 minutes. They go in, this person says magic words, they kick them off to the hospital, they write their report, and that's it. But we're constantly seeing the same people. Like, we have to be better at this. There's got to be something that we can do. So I was like, okay, well, let's try this. So like I said, I went through all the call logs, and I'm like, okay, we did like New Britain at the time. I think I had done like 3,000 mental health calls in the past year. And I'm like, see, like 3,000 calls that we could divert to this unit, and regular patrol officers could go and handle the robberies, the domestics, everything else. And they can actually focus on that time, as opposed to now we got another 503 call that comes out. And that's the statute here in Connecticut, 17A503. So they would just be like, it's 503, 503. So I'm like, we'll handle all that stuff. So I don't hear anything for a few months. So now I'm back on patrol, thinking like, well, it doesn't matter, because let's say this unit gets created, cool. If it gets created and they don't ask me to do it, that's fine too. At least it got created. Or, they ask me to run it. To me, I was just like, it's okay, because I'm focusing on school now. I'm focusing on school, focusing on myself getting better, focusing on my family. And this is where personal stuff really kind of transcends into, okay, now it's affecting everything. So I want to say it's like April now. So I did this in like November, December-ish is when I got released from the unit. And so we're a few months later, and the deputy chief at the time calls me and he goes, hey, we're moving forward with this unit. You're going to be the guy. Okay, cool. He calls me up to his office, congratulates me. He says, okay, you're going to start next week. But we're going to do kind of like a test period where half of you is going to be in uniform, half of you is not going to be in uniform, but you're only going to respond to these calls. I said, cool. Even though I was like, mental health should really just be non-uniform. But he's like, no, we're going to test it out. No problem. So I'm all excited. This is like great. I have whatever schedule I want. I'm running my own unit. I only answer to me. Like the only other person I had to answer to was the deputy chief. Like I completely had no rank structure. It was just Bart, deputy chief.
Yeah.
That's it. I was like, sweet.
That's incredible.
I get to my cruiser and my wife calls me and she's in tears and a panic. She goes, we did not realize how bad our daughter was. Our daughter had been suffering for a while from depression, but we didn't realize how horrible it was. She had actually told her school that she wanted to kill herself, that she was going to sneak taking melatonin so that we thought she was going to bed and then go into the basement and hang herself. So now everything stops. Full bore. I rushed to the school. Actually, I'm sorry. I was going to rush to the school because the state police were there in an ambulance with my wife. And they were taking her to the child psych at the emergency hospital in Yale. So I rush over to Yale. I'm still in uniform, mind you. I called up the chief and I'm like, hey, I have this emergency. I need to go right now. He's like, no, dude, just go. So I end up going and I get over there and now my daughter is in the worst possible spot in her life ever. And we're trying to, as parents, like, where did we screw up? What did we do to get her to this point? Like, what happened? And I'm blaming myself because I'm like, oh my God, I treated her like shit because I was an asshole as a cop. I dragged my family to where we were happy in one town and she kind of had her friends and everything like that to this place where she didn't know anybody. And I'm like, oh my God, now I'm soaking all this in. And I'm like, this is all my fault. My wife, of course, is, having her own where she's like blaming herself. And this really brought us together as a family because she became our focus. So it was sleepless nights. It was sleeping outside her door. It was blocking her door. It was not to like keep her like inside contained, but it was like, if she goes in the middle of the night, I need something to make a noise. So I would put chairs against her door. So if she opened it, it would fall and would wake us up. There was just, she became the focus. She had cut herself. It was something that we were like, where are we failing? So while we're at the hospital, they're like, we're going to inpatient her. We're going to send her inpatient. And my wife's a nurse. I'm a cop. We both know that this is not going to do anything for her because the big reason that they want to do is to keep her safe. But I'm like, I don't have to sleep for the next 6 months. We can work in shift. It's perfectly fine. I can take time off from work. So can my wife.
Yeah.
So we're like, no, we're not letting you guys take her. We brought her home. And the very next day it was find some kind of mental health service for her.
Yeah.
This is something that really pushed me harder into the mental health field because the school gives us a list of like 30 names on there.
Okay.
I went through every single one and I got, I'm not in practice anymore. How did you get my number? My client list is full. I don't see kids. I'm like, the school gave me this. And it was like a total shit show. Like, we're fucking pissed. And so like, we're reaching out to everybody at this point. My wife, luckily, through some connections, we were able to get her into an IOP at Yale. So she was an intensive outpatient program. Which is funny because later on down the line, I have my own experiences with that. So she's over there and we kind of saw that she was getting better, but it wasn't as much. So we found her own individual therapist. We got her on medication, and I'm glad to say that she's actually doing much better. She's still on medication. She still sees her therapist, but to go from not being able to sleep for weeks on end, locking everything up, walking on pins and needles, because things would be okay, and then we notice that it was okay, and then it would be a drop, and suddenly something would happen. Doing this for a couple of years. So she went from that to last summer, she spent the week at a sleepaway camp and no issues. Had the best time of her life, made so many friends. Like, it was just okay. And again, we still talk about mental health. It's still something that, we're still cognizant of, and we check up on her, and, she lets us, she's very much open now about letting us know. I will say that the school did fail us. I was rip shit mad about it. Because there have been some incidences that occurred at the school that they neglected to tell us about. So we were, and you got to understand, 6'7" Bart, former military, wearing his police uniform. And I'm like, I'm going to go there and we're going to have some problems. But thankfully, nothing ended up, we had our conversations. My wife was the voice of reason the entire time and was able to have those good communications with them. Yeah. But again, we still have sour grapes towards the school. But my daughter ended up being in a really good spot now. So she's still progressing, but still recognizes that, hey, there's going to be struggles in life and I need to use these techniques and I need to, really put myself first, because if I don't have ownership of this, no one else is going to do it for me. Yeah. So while all this is going on, I'm still in my master's program. I had just started this mental health unit and I have this going on at home. And we're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Do I need to quit my job? Do I need to quit school? Does my wife need to quit her job? So we sat down and we were like, okay, we will figure this out as a family. We will come together as a family. And my wife, God bless her soul, she was like, you stay in school, because if you don't stay in school, you'll be done. You'll end it and you won't ever go back, because your focus is just going to be her and you'll never have that time. So she's like, you need to stick with this. So I did. And while in school, that's when we had to do these, sessions with each other. So kind of like role play sessions, but they were like, you can either do role play or you can do real play. And I was like, what the hell's real play? They're like, well, you talk about some of your stuff, but you don't go too deep. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So I'm like, okay. Now, to paint the picture of what my master's schooling was like, was I was the only guy. So, and I was the only guy who was a cop and the only guy who was a military. There was no other guys there. So I'm like, this is going to be fun. So we do this and I'm sitting there and they're like, okay, Bart, so you're going to be
I was going to say, like, they're like, don't go too deep. And you're like, where do I go? All your shit's going to be deep.
So, oh my God. Yeah. So I'm like, all right. So I go to the Iraq story with, where I saw the kids and we're all on Zoom and I'm watching all their faces and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm going a little too deep. And I just see them like, yeah. And the teachers and the professor's like looking at me like, and so we're done. And I was like, but the way I described it is not how I normally described it before, where I would kind of talk about it like it's this thing that happened. I actually went deep into my emotions. Like, I felt like shit. I felt like I wasn't able to be there. I felt like, I should have been able to know something. All those things that, that inner dialogue where you just, you fuck with yourself. Yeah. And so I go into all that. And afterwards, she's like, hey, can you just hold on a second? I'm like, oh, crap, here's the talk. And she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. She's like, you look like you're about to have a heart attack. And I'm like, well, it's definitely stirring up some emotions. And I've never said it like this. Yeah. And so she's like, have you ever been to therapy? And I'm like, no. And she's like, you've never been to therapy for even one of the things? Because then I start going into like my time as a cop and everything like that. She's like, not even for one? And I'm like, no. She's like, yeah, you probably should see somebody. And that's when it kind of kicked into like, okay, I probably should take her advice. And that's when I went into therapy through the school. But it was like, I was like, hey, I'm really sorry. I think I just like vicariously traumatized everybody in the class. She's like, no. They need to hear that. But I just want to make sure that you're okay. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm good. I'm all set. And she's like, no.
That's a great teacher. That is a great teacher.
Yeah. No, I have to say, so the school I went to was Sacred Heart University, and the all the staff over there were absolutely amazing. And I actually have to say, like, when I went there, I was petrified because I'm like, I'm the only guy here. I come from this background. I'm not going to get accepted. And they welcomed me with open arms. So much so that the school actually ended up doing an article about me because they were like, hey, you're actually taking the stuff that we're learning and putting it on the streets within 12 hours. And I'm like, yeah.
I think I saw that article.
I need to know it's bullshit. And if it works, I'm going to keep using it. Yeah, I was like, hey, cool. They were like, hey, we're going to do this. I'm like, sweet. I'm just lowly Bart. It's like, no, we need to do this. I'm like, all right, cool. Ended up getting one of my other friends to go to that school. So he's actually enrolled right now going through his program. But it was actually a great experience, but it really kind of laid that foundation of like, you have to be able to persevere. You have to push through because there is going to be bad shit that happens to you. And you can make the choice of either living in it and focusing in on that, or pushing and saying, okay, there's going to be something better. There's going to be something that's going to be okay. And I choose to go in that direction. And as a therapist now, that's kind of when I talk to my clients, I'm like, yes, it seems like it's the end of the world. Yes, it seems like there's no way out. But we can make that choice, and we can work on that, and we can kind of find that thing and then make that the thing that you focus in on.
No, but that's something that's really important though as well, I think, because like you're saying that being able to like validate what someone's experiencing and the emotions that they're feeling and all that kind of thing. So being able to validate it and like feel all of the things, but not like swim in it, but don't drown in it. Like, and then be able to take the perspective and change and whether it's like I don't know whether you would help clients do like the kind of cognitive reappraisal, or even just basically processing it so then they can deal with their grief or any overwhelming emotions that they're feeling, and then move past it and move beyond it, which you have a lot of experience with, I'm sure, anyway.
Just a little bit. But it's something that I bring to the table, and that's why whenever I tell my clients, I go, listen, I don't prescribe to the part where in therapy, a therapist needs to really be separated. There is a level of that, and I completely understand that part, but I'm also like, you got to have that connection. And I tell my clients day one, I'm like, this is going to be very intimate. I'm like, it's almost like we're dating. Yeah. And it's the funny, the guys always look at me like, huh? And I'm like, not to that extent, but you have to be able to tell me your stuff.
Yeah.
And if you don't trust me, then, we're not going to go anywhere. So I always open up about something about myself. And I always offer them hey, if you have a question, please ask me, and I'll kind of tell you what the thing was. But I want you to understand that this is about you. It's not about me. But I say this so that, we can develop that rapport and build that relationship.
Absolutely.
Like,
and that's important, especially like I know that the clients that you see, not all of them are from that first responder, military, veteran realm, but I know that some of them are, and it's a closed off group, because it's really like, if you don't fucking get it, then it's almost like you don't deserve to hear my shit. But and I think and I've experienced it obviously on like a very different level, but like, with my coaching, and hopefully one day as a therapist, when I finally finish all of my things, it's, you can maintain professionalism, but be personable and establish rapport. And so in particular for you, like establishing rapport with a military veteran or with a first responder, it is sharing a little bit. And I know that there is normally such that really defined barrier, but I think that's part of not like the new age version of therapy, but in terms of people like you and like me, hopefully one day in the future, being able to bring our life experience of being a veteran and a first responder in your instance, and a former first responder and the spouse of one in my instance, bringing that to the table, just so that it may just even just open up the door a little bit more to be able for them to let us in and want to share that stuff. And like you're saying, know that they're not going to vicariously traumatize us by telling us that story, so it's incredibly important.
No, definitely. And I know that's always the big one, is whenever my core group kind of comes in and they're talking about like, well, is this going to mess you up? And I'm like, dude, did you not read my bio? Like, go for it.
I'm
like, I
good.
want the authentic you. Yeah. Like, don't worry about it. It's okay.
Yeah.
And they're always like, is it okay if I'm like, be the authentic you. If the authentic you is fucking dropping F-bombs all day, fine. If the authentic you is using dark humor, fine. Like, I want you to feel comfortable, because I don't want you to feel like this is forced. I don't feel like you have to go to this. I want you to want to come to this. And if you're able to do that, then all right, we're rocking and rolling.
Yeah. Exactly. Sorry, I know we bounced around a little bit there, but I guess I just did want to also say, like, thank you for your openness and honesty in not only sharing about your personal, feelings of or suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation, even though I know it was sort of that kind of, from what you shared, like that one sort of moment of like pure, like the depth of darkness, but also sharing your daughter's experiences and then as a family, because I can imagine that is probably one of the things that would break your heart the most. And watching our children struggle is just horrendous. And I can imagine too, like I don't know her age, but by the sounds of it, she sort of has been obviously, going through that COVID experience for a lot of our sort of adolescent children. Like, they had it really tough. There was a lot of isolation. There was a lot of fear and scariness and all that kind of thing that I think we now understand. And I'm not laying any judgment about schools closing down or anything like that, because I believe from my perspective that I think people tried to do what they thought was the best thing at the time. But I can imagine that it really impacted people in that way, and it did affect a lot of our kids' mental health. So I'm really happy to hear that she's doing really well. I can imagine that would have been a lot on you and your wife as parents, and would have, I think you're saying, like, really solidified your family connection, but probably also as a relationship, like really probably forged you and your wife into this, like, probably even stronger than what you ever realized that you kind of had to be or needed to be, but now are, moving forward.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we both come from crisis occupations, and it was just like, yeah, we're good in crisis. And now it was like, okay, how do we deal with each other when we're not in crisis? And then how do we deal with each other when we're in crisis of our own family member? So there was a lot of learning. Yeah, exactly. And it was just, how do we take those roles? Because you act a certain way in that and now apply it to something that's so personal. So it was definitely a lot of us coming together. Open communication was huge. We let everything out. But it was really like, okay, we're doing this together as a team. We're going to work together as a family, and we're going to figure this out. And, things have been going so far so good.
Exactly. And that's incredible. And I think maybe as well, like, knowing that it's good now, but just not going, oh, okay, cool. Like, we're all done and over, and everything's going to be rosy from now on. Like, having that understanding, like you're saying, both of you from like those crisis occupations, that it can ebb and flow, and it can, be a little bit of a roller coaster. So being cognizant of that too. And I think allowing the space for your daughter to kind of go, like, I feel awesome, and have done for, say the last 6 months, but then maybe have a bit of a dip, because that's what humanity is. That's what our mental health is. We are not happy, bubbly people all of the time. Like, I have a naturally bubbly personality, and most people see me like that. So then, like, for me, if there's something like wrong with me, it's normally pretty evident, like people can tell. But that's just the flow of life, So I think allowing space and her knowing that she can come to you guys if she takes a bit of a wobble, or it's like, oh no, I'm having a down day, but like I can recover. And I think knowing that she has that support is so incredibly important.
Oh, absolutely. And then we keep pushing that, hey, we're always here for you. We want you to, work through this, and figure it out. But, you can always come and talk to us. And she does. Yeah. She'll reach out to my wife. She'll, talk to me, and, having that openness and that comfort of knowing, like, hey, if there's a dip, it's okay. Because there was a point where there would be dips, and she was terrified to say anything to us. Because she's like, oh my God, you guys are going to be so mad. It's like, no, we're not mad. We want you to come and talk to us. And eventually, when she kind of realized that it's okay to come and talk, nothing's going to happen. Yeah. She was like, oh, all right, I feel more comfortable. She feels more comfortable talking to my wife than me, but as long as she's talking to somebody, it's okay.
No, that's I mean, like I'm considered the fun police in my family. I have a 5 and 8 year old boys, so they're like, dad's the fun one, and I'm the fun police. Yep. So I have to ride that sometimes.
Yep. No, I hear you.
But so we'll quickly wind back to where you were at, and obviously you were made the family choice to continue on with your master's program, but it was also right at the inception of this mental health unit that obviously you got said, hey, yep, you're in charge, let's roll with it, with the one stipulation that they wanted a bit of like a mixture of some plain clothes and then some uniform presence. What was that rollout like? And talk to me about, like, did you get control over who came into the unit? Talk to me about how the inception went.
Sure. So the original plan was that this was going to be a trial period for a year of just me by myself.
Okay.
The first few weeks, like I said, it was uniform and then plain clothes. And by week 3, I went fully plain clothes. It was very quickly evident that I was getting more positive feedback from showing up not in a uniform.
Yeah.
So people were calling and saying, hey, there was this cop who came here and he's not in uniform, but like he really helped. And I mean, there was still people still knew I was an officer because I had my body cam on me, I had my radio, and I drove a really crappy, unmarked cop car. So they were like, well, clearly he's on the job. But everything else was concealed. Like my firearm was concealed, my badge was concealed, my handcuffs were concealed, and I just went there. But the beauty of it is that when I showed up on a call, I was with that person for however long it took. So that could be an hour. It could be, sometimes it lasted an entire shift. Just one person.
Yeah, there was that level of continuity. Yeah.
Yep. And they always knew that if something happened, they could call me directly. The PD furnished me with my own cell phone, so people had direct access to me. And that's how we rolled. And it started off with, I want to say in the beginning, I think I had about 20 cases for like the first couple of days. And by the end of that year, I had a caseload of about 700 because I didn't close cases out. That was the one thing that made this unit unique, is that we would combine cases because we knew we would see people multiple times. But we had about 700 people out of, I want to say the city has about 80,000. That were in constant communication. So there was either check-ins, and so not everybody had to be checked in every single day, but some people required, once a week, and some required maybe more than that, some required less than that. And it was kind of like finding a good flow. That was the big part of this unit that made it so unique, is like, hey, you can test the waters and see what works and what doesn't work. Yeah. Because if the uniform part worked more, then we were going to go fully uniform, but we realized not uniform was going to be a better option. And I dressed very plain clothes. I mean, there was a lot of plaid shirts and jeans and cowboy boots and hat, and like that was how I rolled at work. And normally, the guys who are plain clothes wear a certain outfit, and I was like, no, I need to separate completely. Like I grew my beard out, and I was like, I cannot have any association. And as much as it sucks to say, but it was the truth, I can't be viewed as a police officer. I have to be viewed as a helper or somebody that's there to kind of assist. And so that was the role I came in. I never announced myself as officer. I always said my name's Bart. I'm with the New Bern Police Department. And that's kind of how I would talk to people. And a lot of the tactics that I used were kind of frowned upon a little bit, because they were like, why are you sitting next to this person? Well, I'm like, I have to close the distance. I also knew that I could take care of myself. I'm like, if something were to happen, I could press the panic button, I could do what I need to do. But I was like,
I am the man mountain of New Britain Police Department.
Exactly. So I was like, I think I'll be okay. Were there a few hairy moments? Sure. But it was like, hey, the gift of the gab, use your negotiation techniques and kind of talk people down. But for the most part, I'd say like 99.9% of the people I dealt with, easy, no issues whatsoever. And so it kind of rolled. But I also knew that we also need to kind of have something that is proactive, that's also law enforcement related. And that's where I kind of also did some work with the FBI. Okay. And a lot of people were like, really? So I'm like, you didn't do like anything else? I'm like, no. This is when my career really kind of like skyrocketed. There was an incident that was occurring that the Youth Bureau, the FBI, and I got kind of tapped into it. And without going into a lot of details with it, it was a case that I would have never been able to do had I not been in the role that I was in. So running the mental health unit, having my master's, working through my master's, they were like, we see something here. We have an FBI agent who's also part of the behavioral assessment unit. So
Yeah.
the BAU, like the criminal minds, all that kind of stuff. So he was there, and me and him linked up, and we worked on
Nice.
this case. I did my part, and I was like, this is super cool. But I'm like, if this is going on now, and this is one that I just brought the attention to, what about the other ones that I don't know about? So that also became the part of the unit that we didn't really put too much about. And that was if we came across somebody that we really recognized was a mental health concern, I would put out a threat alert, and the reason why. So normally this would be somebody who had access to firearms, or somebody who would talk about like doing a mass shooting, or something that was just really, we need to kind of keep an eye on this person. There's just something about them that is concerning. And it wouldn't necessarily be because of the mental health diagnosis, but it would be what's going on that they're saying currently.
Yeah, more
so
the behavior or the acute behavior that they
Exactly.
were exhibiting. Yeah.
Yep. One person in particular was somebody who was fascinated with World War II firearms, specifically that of the Nazi regime. Would talk about wanting to commit ambushes, and would say that people were pieces of meat. So that's somebody who was definitely on our radar, somebody that I would keep close contact with. So the way I would go through that is I would make friends with their friends. So his roommate was somebody that I was in constant contact with. And not to say, okay, did he do anything that I'm going to go arrest him on? But it's like, how do we get him the help that he needs? My biggest concern was that under my watch, I was never going to allow an Aurora situation or any kind of mass violence to occur while I ran this unit. So I lived and breathed this unit. I would link up again with that special agent and say, hey, this is what I have. And again, networking led me into being able to have connections at higher levels for state when it came to mental health. So I was talking with different directors of hospitals, different people at different organizations, and saying, hey, this is what I have. And it kind of grew into other cases. So I had my 700 people that I would like kind of help out. And then my other group that I was like, okay, these are the people that are concerns. If something were to ever, if they deviate in any way, we're stepping in 100%. And we are building a case. And the big thing is that a lot of times when you send somebody up to the hospital, they can talk their way out of it. Unless it's something where it's acute and they need to go. Most people are able to say the right words and be like, okay, you're good to go. I wanted to make sure that if I sent somebody to the hospital, they were going. Like there was no questions asked. So I would have case files and everything like that built up, text messages, the whole 9 yards. So a lot of this stuff actually led into me joining the. There was a. Oh my God, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was a kind of like a joint meeting between the FBI, heads of different mental health units, different police departments who ran similar units in Connecticut. And we would kind of discuss cases and like how we were handling different cases. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to mental health, short of there being an active crime going on, everything's voluntary. So I could go up to someone and be like, hey, you really need help, but they could tell me to kick rocks. So unless we get enough to do the paperwork, like a 503 on them where they're committed, there's really nothing we can do. It's just more or less monitoring, kind of keeping in contact.
Sorry to interrupt. Does Connecticut have is it called like the red flag warning applications that people can fill out?
They do for firearms. Here's where it becomes interesting because it's very vague and it's very broad. So let's say someday there's a married couple, they get a divorce, and somebody says something to somebody that they don't like. Hop on the phone with the Connecticut State Police or whoever. Hey, this person said so and so, but there's no real like mental health thing ahead of that. It's just, hey, they said this out of anger or spite. There's always going to be an investigation, things like that, but it's very vague and it's very like all encompassing. Whereas I'm like, I need to be very focused. There were a few people who I did contact the state police and had their firearms removed without a doubt. This actually goes into one case where very early on in creating this unit, I want to say it was like the first week, I get a call to go to this house. And mom's calling, uniforms are on scene already, and I walk over there and I'm like, hey, mental health's going to take this one. So I go inside and I go talk to the guy. The mom tells me, hey, he served overseas. He's an Iraq veteran. I'm like, boom, here we go. Connection. I got this. Rock on, Bart. And I walk into the room and I start talking with him, but he's giving me that 1,000-yard stare. He's looking through me and he's not connecting with me in any way. Exactly. And he's concentrating on the video game, but he's not dismissive, like in a way where he's like, get the fuck out of my face. It's more along the lines of like, he doesn't even see me. And I'm using every trick in the book. So I'm finally like, okay, let me try this. I'm going to try the mom route. I go, hey, mom called us here. Do you trust your mom? He goes, yeah. I said, do you love your mom? He goes, yeah. I go, do you feel like mom would ever want to hurt you? And he's like, no. I said, do you feel like mom would just want the best for you? He goes, yeah. I said, well, mom's the one who called us because mom's really, really concerned about you. So we go back and forth. Eventually he's like, okay, I'll go to the hospital. We take him in. The following day, we go to do a follow-up with the family because that was my bread and butter with the unit was we would have to do a follow-up. Whoever went to the hospital, we go and do a follow-up the following day with the family or whoever was there that was connected. Like if it was just a bystander, we wouldn't do that. But family, friends, people that we knew were going to have an added connection with this person so that we could offer, hey, these are the avenues that you could use, for you and also for them when they get out. So we went back and talked to mom. So we're talking to mom, and mom goes, oh, hey, by the way, he's got a gun in his room. My partner at the time goes in there, finds said gun, locked and loaded Glock, one in the chamber, right where he was pacing back and forth. So I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, holy shit. Thank God I went in there with this very like, hey, I'm here to help, very open-handed, just everything under the sun to keep the situation calm. So like if I had bum rushed him in there, it's right there. Like I did not even see this thing at all. Like it was tucked away a little bit. So I'm like, we would have been done. So I was like, always be aware, always be cognizant. But I was like, tone of voice and the way you present yourself is huge in this world. And that was one of those jump off points that they really were like, okay, this unit's staying. We cannot not have this unit. So we went from there. And, for a year, it was a lot of great connections. It was a lot of meetings. But they noticed really quickly that I was doing a lot of things, really not on the street anymore because I was being tied with going to talk to directors, going to talk to different nurses. And I have to say that I had some really great connections. There was a lot of people who really supported this unit, who really made it what it was. And if I didn't have them, I wouldn't be here right now. Valerie Walton, for one, she is currently a nurse. She had left the place where she was, but she's still in the city, still doing great things. And we had a couple other guys who really were huge to help us out, who were part of EMS. Dan, he was a navigator with the EMS and just great people. But they were like the key components to this unit. So as we progressed, they were really kind of like, we all worked together, three amigos. But that was the big thing, is that we always communicated with each other. We would talk about, okay, I'm bringing in this person. This is what I'm seeing on scene, and building those relationships and fostering those relationships made it so that I would have access, that I could get people in and not have to go through, but they're just drunk. Like, no, they're not drunk. They have this other mental health going on. They're just under the influence right now. Okay, well, it's you, Bart, who's bringing this in, and we know that you do your work. So
we trust your
we're going
judgment.
to bring this person up. Exactly.
Well, also every job that you're attending, you're also sort of like learning that obviously your situational awareness would be really good, but you're also looking at things from like a brand new perspective, and like, how do I come in and like my tone and my approach, but also, maintaining my own safety. And then if it's not me, who's 6'7", like giant of a person, and someone else comes and works in this unit who might be like me, who's, I like to say 5'7", but I'm really not. I'm 5'6". And I'm capable. I can handle myself, but physiological, like a man's always going to be stronger than me. So you're also sort of looking at things from like a very different perspective. So it sounds like you probably almost like writing kind of forward thinking policy with each day as it goes by, in each different perspective that you're having. And like you're saying, like, you need resources for like a civilian population, but like this dude was a veteran. So like there could be a position at a VA hospital or like a different sort of program. Like you've got the home-based thing that the Red Sox do, like all that, like all these different kind of pieces that you were having to like really figure out where they sat in the puzzle of everything that you're trying to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, at the end of the day, we all know that mental health, especially at the state level, there's no money in it. It's so difficult to try to get anybody any kind of real care. If you don't have the right insurance, if you don't have your own thing, it's incredibly hard. And to try to navigate that, it's like, well, this person's going to sit at this hospital for maybe 3 months until a bed opens up somewhere else. And it's all based on need. It's really, really hard. And I'm competing against other people, from other towns, next to me who are like, well, we need to send this person. We're like, so do I, but there's only one bed. So what do you do then?
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So year one, units rocking out, again, 700 cases. I'm meeting with all these different people. They're starting to say, hey, we need you to meet with, city council, things like that. They want to meet more of me because they're like, we didn't even know you existed. I'm like, well, we really didn't want to put it out there too much. We want us to be a resource for people and not just be something that was going to get exploited. And I have to say, the chiefs that I worked under during this time, like Chief Shoot, he was the one who like spearheaded this whole thing. He was the guy who said yes. He's the one who I shot my shot with. He did absolutely amazing. Yeah. Deputy Chief Murphy, who ended up going to another police department, he was the one who like really supported it and really pushed it forward. And now the current chief, Chief Marino, he was just like, whatever you need, go to town, keep doing this. He's like, awesome. I don't see a future without this unit. So he was always I had nothing but support from everybody. There's always some nays there, but whatever about them. But yeah, overall, it was a great experience. But again, they started noticing like, hey, he's really tied up all the time. And I was like, I can shift every once in a while, but like, I still have my home life. I'm still in school. Like, there has to be some give and take here. So they were like, okay, we recognize how much work you're doing. We recognize that you can't always be the guy that's out there. You're going to need some help. So year two, I get another officer. I was part of the kind of recruitment interview and then kind of the training, because I was like, okay, well, we're not going to find another Bart anywhere. There's not going to be anybody who's sitting here who's going for their master's or anything like that. Like, we need to find, how do we replicate this level onto just another officer? And I got super lucky. I had 2 people who applied. I had everybody under the sun walk up to me and be like, dude, I want this gig. It's super cool. You get to do what you want. And I'm like, well, it's not about that. But, I understand the appeal behind it. Yeah. And 2 guys ended up applying and going through the process. Both were really good guys, but, you can only have one. And so my buddy, Jerry Chimura, he ends up going on. He did the best interview. And when I bring him on, now, Jerry, I got to say, has a wealth of experience, but was not a mental health guy. He was a detective in the narcotics unit. He was an SRO. He's on the dive team. He had like great experience, in which I was really, that's what made him desirable, is not the fact that he had this experience, but the fact that he was open to new experiences and how he could jump from these different things. And I was like, you are an SRO. It means you can talk to kids. This is great. This is what we need. So he gets on board and I start sending him through the pipeline. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to be the first one, bud. So you're going to go through this pipeline. We're going to see if this rocks or this sucks. Yeah. So I put him through a lot of online training. I put him through a lot of CIT, so the crisis intervention team training. I sent him to that. We went to training together for different mental health courses, and I just kind of put him through the ringer. And we would go to calls together. So like the first, I want to say 3-4 months, we were side by side. We would go to calls together. He would see how I would operate. I would see how he would operate. We would make minor tweaks here and there. And we like had a blast. The department also noticed like, hey, listen, that's great that Bart is on his way to become a clinician, but the state of Connecticut is really pushing to have clinicians either on call or attached at their police departments. So we got super lucky. We ended up getting Sierra Perez. Now, she is a fully licensed social worker through the state of Connecticut. She actually works for CMHA, which is right next door to the PD. But she came on board with us as our clinician. So she worked in the office. She went to calls with us, hand in hand. She would write reports, the whole 9 yards. When I interviewed her, I was like, hey, listen, what are you going to do if, like, we're at a call somewhere and somebody, like, jumps me? She's like, I'll fuck him up. And I'm like, there we go. That's it.
You're like, so you have the position. Yep. Exactly.
I was like, you are all set. So she came on board and she revolutionized us. Because I had a certain way of doing things, but I was doing it through what I knew, which was the police world. Yeah. She came into it from the social worker world and crisis management. And she streamlined so much stuff. Like, we went from 700 cases to actually keeping it where it was manageable. And she was like, okay, let's do this. Let's kind of set these programs up. Let's do that. And it was like the best relationship ever. Got her hooked up with a bunch of different courses.
That's amazing.
Made sure that she went to the FBI negotiation course. Like, it was just like, we need to get you up to speed with everything that we do. And it just became the three of us. Jerry ended up taking the evening shift, so I stayed on days. He went to evenings, and Sierra kind of jumped in between both.
Floated,
and it rolled. It kept on going, and we were an unstoppable team. I mean, we would go and take calls constantly. Jerry, like, he never stayed in the office. His radio was on him at all times. Whenever that call came out, he would be canceling units, and like, he's going. I'm trying to still go to calls while still being dragged all over the place. Like, hey, we need you to meet with this person. We need you to meet with that person. I'm like, just calls. But it really got to a spot where this unit needed to expand again. Unfortunately, that was at the time where I was at a point where I was like, I'm going to make a life decision here. And at 11 years, with the height of my career, I decided to retire. Decided that I'm going to walk out when I'm at my happiest, and I am willing to still provide to this department whatever it needs. Because I still maintained my instructor certificate, and I was like, hey, whatever you guys need, I will come into academies, because I was still teaching here and there. I'll do in-service. I don't care. I'll provide whatever support, because I was part of the peer unit. So I was like, if the peer support unit needs a clinician, I'm here for you guys. But I was also like, okay, I need that next step. I really need to focus my life as a clinician now. Because I was like, you know what? Crisis is good, but I'm like, let's look at the grand scheme of things. I've been doing this since, 2000. I'm like, I think I've ridden that train long enough. I need to kind of switch gears a little bit. And I also knew that as much as I loved the position, I loved my team, and I loved the department, my heart just wasn't in it anymore. I was just like, I was done being a cop. I really just loved being the clinician part of it. And while I was doing my internship, my last year at school, I was like, this is it. I spent every waking hour, packing in the hours. I would be there Saturday, sun up to sundown, evening, I did not care. I was just like, I love doing this. And so, as difficult as it was, me and my wife sat down, we talked about it. And again, complete godsend. She was just like, all right, it's a risk without a doubt, because New Britain Police isn't going anywhere. But let's say this job that you take, you're starting at the bottom of the barrel. Like, you are a brand new graduate. Like, you're going to make less money. There's who knows what's going to happen. And some people may recognize your background. Some people may not. So I was applying for, like, I want to say probably 6-7 months, just looking at different positions. And I've been offered a lot of great positions. But there was different reasons why I didn't take them. Some of them were just distance was way too far. Pay was just not really there. Maybe the position was not exactly what I wanted. And then I came across this one position. And initially, it had been as a therapist, but the pay was really good and it was close. And I'm like, I think we're going to investigate this a little bit more. So I kind of look at it, and I meet with the CEO of the company, and we kind of start talking, and, conversations turn from, hey, you sound like a great therapist, to you sound like somebody who knows how to manage, and I have a different position if you're interested. So I'm like, okay, what's the position? She goes, well, it would be director of an IOP. And I'm like, what the hell is an IOP? I said, I know my daughter went through an IOP, but like, what kind of IOP are we talking? She's like, well, it'll be for kids. And I'm like, oh, I'm not a kid guy. Like, it's door kicker, like mental health, like not kids. Definitely. And I said, I'm definitely not director level. I said, as cool as it sounds, like, I can manage my unit. I can do all that stuff, but that's different because, like, I walk in and I have a badge. Like, people are going to want to, like, connect. It's different when you come in as a civilian and they're like, who the hell are you? Who do you work for again? So I was like, okay. So we start talking numbers, and it was money that I couldn't walk away from. I was like, ooh, okay, well, that's really a significant jump. So again, me and my wife had this sit down conversation, and we kind of go through all the pros and cons. Like, I could stay at the PD. It's never going to go anywhere. I have everything I need. I can progress. because there was a lot of, hey, you really should take the sergeant exam. You're creating your own unit. But I looked at it as, okay, I made my own. I'm at the peak. Like, what more can I possibly do? Like, I created it. I ran it. I got a lot of notoriety because of it. Like, what more is there out there? So after lots of discussion, we decided, okay, I'm going to make the jump. So I retired from the PD. I made sure that I was still, like, they were okay with me staying as a part-timer. So God forbid anything were ever happen, I could go back and I would still teach. And I said, listen, you guys have done so much for me. I'm going to remain as an instructor free of charge. Like, you don't have to pay me, because I know they were paying outside people. I'm like, no, I love this department too much. I love you guys too much. I want to make sure that I'm available. If something ever happens and you have a new officer who I'm not connected to and they need to talk to somebody, send them to me. Like, it's okay. I'll work things out.
Yeah.
So it was probably one of the hardest ones where I ever had to say, hey, I'm leaving. I did get choked up a little bit because I was like, oh man, I'm going to miss these guys. I'm definitely going to miss this department. But I also knew that this was the jump that I kind of needed to make in order to, like, kind of progress.
Yeah.
So I go. And I didn't take any time off. I retired on Friday and I was working this new job Monday. So now this new job is suit and tie. And I'm like, ooh, okay, big boss. I show up and I will say this, though. I had talked to a lot of people prior to me taking this job because I had never heard of this company before. So I was like, I don't know. It's kind of a risk, because I had talked to a lot of other bigger companies and they were like, this is what we could start you at. And they were not looking at that position as a director. They were just like basic LPC. So I'm like, okay, this is a lot of money, but I've never heard of this place. So let me kind of do a little digging. So everyone I talked to who knew about it was like, don't do it. Don't go there. And I'm like, you know what? The stuff that they're talking about, stuff that happened a long time ago. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I was totally like blinded. And I tell everybody to this day, they're like, dude, you heard all the red flags. Why'd you go? And I said, for two reasons. One, because I'm an egomaniac. And two, is because of the pay. Like, let's call for what it is. I had power. I was like, ooh, yay, good for Bart. Like, you're progressing. And that's, everyone jokes about it. I say it in jest, but it did have that element of it. And I was like super excited. So I'm like, who graduates from school up to this position? It never happened. So I was like, ooh, this is gonna be cool.
Yeah.
But they were like, don't do it. Whatever you do, don't do it. So I'm like, well, the stuff that they're talking about happened so long ago, and we're all about second chances and mental health. So I'm like, let me go into it. Let me see what happens. So I go in, and I will say this: the team that I had that worked in the IOP were fantastic. These were great clinicians. These were people who truly cared about the work, and we did a lot of great work. We had kids who were really suffering, and I really felt like there was a lot of positives that we brought. Unfortunately, Bart is not made to be a director. And so there was a lot of stuff that ended up occurring, a lot of things that I was just like, you know what, this is not the position for me. Me and the owner, who we initially got along with real well, and I thought was going to be super okay because I had trained one of their family members at the police academy. So I'm like, oh, okay, you know who I am then. And they're like, yeah, no, we know you.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right. By, I want to say a month into it, I started kind of thinking like, this isn't going to work out. This is not for me. There was a lot of demands that were made as far as my time goes. And I was used to a very princess schedule. I could have whatever I wanted to go to, hey, you're salaried, so you technically, this is your life now. You can't do anything else. The focus needs to be here. And when I kind of started saying no, it was like, okay, now you could tell like things were shifting. Like the mood towards me was shifting. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'll ride this out a little bit. And if it doesn't get any better, then I'm going to pull the plug. And I started noticing that it was getting progressively worse, to the point where I actually left the office midday and called the chief and was like, hey, I may need to come back. I think I made a mistake. And he was like, listen, come back, we'll talk, and we'll figure it out. So, and to his credit, he actually sat down with me and was like, if you need to leave, it's okay. Like, we'll take you back. It's not a problem. You left. We understand why you left. And the big thing is I didn't leave to go to another police department. I left because, I really believed in the mission. Yeah. And they were like, yeah, we'll take you back because of that. So that week goes by and nothing happens. And I get an email like, hey, Bart, you're doing great. I have no intention of ever firing you. And because I actually was putting it out there, like, oh, I think I'm going to get fired. And they're like, no, we have no intention, anything like that. So I'm like, okay. Lo and behold, I decide I'm going to resign because it's just not working out. And so a few days later, I get the termination notice. You are no longer welcome back. And I was like, well, I just resigned on Monday. Now I'm fired on Thursday. But I looked at it. Yeah, exactly. But I looked at it this way. I was like, you know what? This was a great learning experience for me. Because I have to look at the silver lining in all this. Did it afford my family, good pay, time, ability to do things? Sure. Did it come with a lot of stuff that I just couldn't mold to? Absolutely. So I was like, okay, this was a great experience to see, like, hey, sometimes these things that are too good to be true might actually be too good to be true. And yeah, and I said, you know what? I'm a big boy. At the end of the day, I made this decision, but I'm glad I did, because it also showed me, like, that's not the life that I want. I don't want to be that kind of position. I really enjoyed.
I do need to ask a very important question, though. Where was your cynicism after 20 years as a cop?
Oh man. So it was
just shit staring you, but still.
Oh yeah, it was. I was definitely there. Because here's the thing, though, I always tend to find my equal somewhere, and my equal was there. My equal actually was an APRN who was a veteran, and so when me and him got together, it was like, forget it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there was definitely a lot of like, really? There was a lot of that. But I also recognize that this is not really the position for me. And I got super lucky. And this is where I go into networking and, not burning bridges, things like that. You just never know when things might come back. So the one thing I forgot to mention is when I first graduated and Sierra is sitting in my office and she's noticing that I'm looking at different positions, she's like, hey, I have a friend who owns her own clinic. Would you be interested in being a part-timer over there? I'm like, yes, absolutely. So I reached out to her friend, Sam Burgos, who owns Headspace LLC, and she was like, yeah, come on down. And we instantly clicked. She was just like,
amazing.
Yes, you're going to have a great time here. You can really do whatever you want, your own schedule, be your own boss, see whatever clients you want. I will send you clients as well, but you're independent. You're going to be on you. And Sarah, actually, was funny, twist of events, Sarah ended up becoming my boss over there. So now we're fast forwarding back to where I'm now. I resigned. I've been kind of hunting. I'm like, I need to find a new gig because I don't really want to go back to the police department, but I knew if I had to, I would. So I'm looking, and Sarah calls me up and she's like, hey, do you want to leave Headspace? And I'm like, no, the opposite. I'm looking because this is what's going on. And I'm concerned because I'm like, I have a family, I have a mortgage. I know I can't stay here because it's just not working out. But I also knew I got to find something, and I know what's out there too. I'm like, maybe I burned too many places that I said no to. And she's like, well, because you applied somewhere and they reached out to us because we know them, and they're like, are you trying to leave Headspace? And I go, no. I said, if Sam ever were to be like, we'll take you on full time, I would go in a heartbeat. She's like, stand by. I'm like, oh, here we go. So I call up Sam, and she's like, hey, call Sam. So I call Sam, and I'm like, hey, Sam, I just want to let you know this what's going on. She's like, oh my God, Bart, I'm so sorry about what's going on. And Sam was really cool because she could have told me, you work for me, you can't work for this other place. And she said, no, go, keep working there. Do you want to still stay here part-time? Like, absolutely. Yeah, you've been nothing but great to me. And, I love this place. I have no intention of leaving. So she's like, okay, well, that's cool. You're going to stay with us and go part-time and work there full-time. Because it was a different position, too. I was a therapist at Headspace, but I was a director at this other place. So I go, all right, let's just do that. So when I was leaving this other place, she goes, well, you can come here and be a full-time therapist. And I go, okay. I said, but there's nobody full-time. She's like, you don't worry about that part, Bart. We will get you to full-time. And it was a short time later, I was working full-time. I had to do some financial, changing things. But there was a bit of a concern because as I transitioned, there was some things that were said to me, like some threats. But I said it's going to be okay because I'm not doing that position here. I'm doing something else. And then it was like, okay, well then we can backtrack that. So nothing ever came of it. Ended up being as I like to say now, it's been a clear split. And I wish them nothing but the best of luck, honestly, because they do actually do great work with these kids, and I have seen the progress that comes over there. I just realized that I'm not the right person for that job. And I felt better going back to Headspace. And so that's where I've been ever since. Again, I work the hours I get to work. I have the clients, and it's so funny because I always said I am only going to work first responders and veterans, nobody else. And now we come to today where I work first responders, veterans, couples, kids, and elderly. I'm like, how the hell did I get here?
Wow.
So
like the whole gambit.
I love, and it was wild because they were like, I'm like, I'm not really a couples guy. Like, I'm going to tell them like, you're an idiot and you're an idiot. And it switched up to like sitting there and really being with people. And I'm like, oh my God, like I can actually do this. And then with the kids, like I instantly had that connection with them, and we sit there and it's, again, they keep coming back. Because I asked the parents, I'm like, hey, are they okay? Because I tell the parents right off, I'm like, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm very transparent. Like, this is my background. Like, if you're looking for somebody that is specifically going to work with kids, that's not my background. Like, I can
a little more like kind of fuzzy wuzzy, touchy feely sort of.
I'm not the play therapist, and I'm kind of like gonna talk them through. But I was like, I have my personal experience with this, so I kind of work that like teenager age range. That's kind of where I limit it. And the parents are like, no, we want you, and I'm like, why? I'm not gonna squirt your kid. They're like, doesn't matter. We want you. You're gonna tell them exactly what needs to happen. I'm like, okay. And I've seen these kids progress. Like, they've been doing amazing stuff. And at the end of the day, I always tell everybody, like, therapy is not what I do. It's about the work that you do. And, every single one of them is finding success in whatever success looks like to them personally, but they're all doing amazing.
Great,
and we get some times where they're kind of looking at me and I'm like, who do you think did this? And they're like, wow, no one would ever say that to me before. And I'm like, well, it's you, dumbass. There's been a few that I've had to say that to, but they're always my first responders. I never say that to the kids. And that's kind of like where the difference is between what I've noticed with when I have because I always have the first, like, have you ever seen another therapist before? And they're like, yeah, but they always sugarcoated everything. I need somebody to tell me like it is. I'm like, well, you're definitely going to get that here. You don't have to worry about that. But it's not in a demeaning way. It's in a way of like, hey, this is what you're used to. I need to speak to you at your language because that's what would have connected with me. It wasn't like, oh, Bart, we're so worried. It's like, hey, jackass, you're fucking things up. You need to fucking do something. And that's what the key was for me. It's like, oh shit, I fucking need to. And so that's kind of where we find that common ground.
Yeah, well, as well as and speaking to people in plain language, and your adult population in particular, your veterans and your first responders, like taking accountability for our own shit is important. Like we cannot control all of the things that we endure, experience, are exposed to at work because that is just the nature of our roles. And, part of it is like quote unquote what we sign up for, but not in like a dismissive way. But we know, we're going to see some shit. They give us like all of the training, but we're never trained on, okay, this is what you're going to see. And then this is how you're going to cope. So they're sort of coming to you in order to learn those sort of tactics and skills and mechanisms that we never were really taught when we sort of first started our careers. But being told straight up in straight language of like, okay, it's not your fault that you're exposed to this, but how you're responding and you treating people like shit, that is your fault.
Exactly.
And being able to speak to them in that plain way, I think it, it's what speaks to us. It's how we speak to each other. It's how we speak to ourselves. So I think having that kind of connection and building that rapport is really, really important. And I think would be for your clients.
Oh, definitely. That's kind of where I see that the first responders, because that was my biggest concern is like, I'm going to get them in, but are they going to stay? So it's got to be that connection. If it's not there, it doesn't matter what my background is. They're going to be like, but you're a therapist right now in front of me. And so I was like, okay, I have to keep going with this. And there's definitely times where I tailor it. Sometimes it has to be like, hey, dude, it's okay. Like, that was a really fucked up thing that you went and saw.
Yeah.
And let's kind of, process it and go through it. But I also have civilians who come up to me who are just going through life stressors. And with them, it's like, okay, some of this stuff you just have no control over. And that's okay too. Like, you can observe, just don't absorb. And so we kind of walk through a lot of that stuff. The couples, though, I will say, hand on, they're always the best, because they're like, I want you to finally tell us what's going on. And I'm like, okay, I haven't been married to you for 15 years. I don't know. Let's start talking about it. And it always comes down to this. I'm going to wear a sign now. It's all about communication. That's it. That's all it ever comes down to.
Absolutely. All about communication and a little bit of like a radical acceptance, I think, is always good.
Absolutely.
All right, Bart, I have taken up like a lot of your time today, so I am so appreciative of you coming on and sharing your experiences and your background, and both like from a personal sense and a professional sense. I really, really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. I really appreciate, being able to discuss this. And I hope that, somebody listens to it and kind of realizes like, it's okay. Stuff is going to happen, and, you're going to be fine. You're going to make it through. And that's why I always say, hey, if anyone ever wants to know about backgrounds, like it's okay to put light on this stuff. Like, don't contain it, because the more you contain it, the more you're hurting yourself and you're hurting people around you. It's okay to put light on these things.
Absolutely. I really, really like that. So I normally end these conversations by asking our guests 2 questions. And it comes from the nature of the fact that in our roles, we see a lot of darkness. So the first question that I like to ask is, what do you do to hold space for your own darkness?
So, holding space for it. I would say really kind of putting it out there. And how I do that is mainly at academies. I show my authentic self. I put it out there. I have broken down in academies and talked about it, but I need people to recognize it, that it's okay, that you're going to have darkest of things that happen to you. And it's okay to put it out there and not hold on to it and not say, okay, this is just mine. It's okay for the world to see, because things are going to be okay.
Yeah, I really love that. Thank you for sharing it. And the second question is, what can someone do, and whether that is a friend, a spouse, a colleague, anything like that, what can they do in order to support you in holding space for that darkness?
Never give up. It's going to seem like somebody doesn't want to talk and somebody just isn't ready, but have that support. Know that there will come a time when they will be willing to talk about things, and you don't have to try to provide answers. You don't have to try to save them or anything like that. Just by sitting and listening and supporting. It's always the big thing, and just being there. That's really all it comes down to, is that if they know that you're there, that speaks more than anything else.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Absolutely. All right, we are going to end it there. Thank you again for your time, Bart. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and jump on and share your experiences and your word with us.
Of course, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you. All right, this has been another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I've been your host, Erin Jane. And as always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers.
Hi guys, it's Erin Jane here. Firstly, thank you for listening to I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. This podcast really is for you, the listener, and I hope you're finding as much value in listening to these conversations as I am in having them. If you'd like to offer any feedback, suggest a subject matter, are interested in being a podcast guest, or would like to get in contact to receive first responder life and wellness coaching services, please reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Erin Jane Coaching, or the dedicated podcast account, Erin Jane _Darkness Podcast, or my website, www.erinjanecoaching.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'm so grateful to have you as part of this darkness community. Cheers.